in the next slide is showing that as you go close to life, interaction, things become increasingly complex. I mean, if you are making something like a parabolic shot, which is on the physics side, you can be very accurate. You can send a capsule all the way to Mars and make sure it will land safely and smoothly most of the times. However, when you come into bio, like in the next slide, things change. I mean, like kicking a peer. You cannot predict the exact effect of the kick. You know that the other person will not like it, but you cannot really predict the extent of the damage. In the next slide, you can see that if you're exposing a person to a molecule, say an aspirin, we typically heal the headache, but you make it triggers an adverse effect instead. And in the next slide, when you expose a person to a material, that's a big challenge, because a material is not like a molecule with a couple of isomers. It can have like huge amount of possible surface and properties and still be the same material. And in the next slide, you also see an additional challenge, which is that when we characterize materials, we typically make a bulk characterization. And most of the effect is because of the surface interaction. You can click twice or thrice, maybe. Okay, that's good. So the surface interaction will actually be at the core of the reactivity of the material. So we have to make some characterization which is more sensitive to the surface. But in addition, that surface interaction will also shape the material in the environment and in the body. So things become increasingly complex. And that is the big challenge, to be able to understand that and to know what we have at the surface. In the following slide, you can see like an example for one of our partners. This is about zinc oxide. Depending on how you prepare it, it can be non-toxic and be very good to kill spores and bacteria. Or, on the other hand, the same material can be toxic and not efficient to kill spores and bacteria. So this is really a big challenge. For that reason, on the next slide, the idea that we have in NanoInformaTIX is basically to make this a sustainable framework to provide a way to predict the properties of these materials in a way that is more cost efficient and also minimize animal and even cell testing, and ultimately make a platform that will allow people access this knowledge so that we will be the interface, like we like to say in surface science. The interface is the device, and this platform will be the interface between the knowledge and the needs of different end users. Next slide is showing you that we basically stand on data. That is like the key source. So in the next one, what you can see is that basically what NanoInformaTIX is doing is doesn't begin from zero. I mean, we already work from eNanoMapper, and what we are doing is to integrate data from completed projects, from ongoing projects, and also from other projects outside Europe or associations like our partners in the US, Canada, South Africa, and mainland China. In the next slide, you see an outcome from Work Package 2, basically made with the Jupyter Notebook, so that you don't really have to see the details. It's basically it's the general idea. You can see like on the left panel, like number of materials and projects that are or are not looking at these materials. Green means that we do have data. In the middle panel, you see like a collection of materials and their physical chemical properties. We do have some gaps. On the right panel, you see some materials and some adverse effects. And again, we have some data and we have some gaps. If you overlap the middle and the right one, you can see that there is a significant number of gaps. So there's a lot of things we need. So in the next slide, the idea of this project is basically to make models on the next one, where basically the idea is to be able to fill all these gaps and bring the rationale behind the toxicity in the very different levels of knowledge. And from that, we mean that we are making materials modeling, exposure modeling, biodistribution modeling, and dose response modeling. And as you can see on the following one, basically, the idea is that there are like 3 work packages looking at these key pillars. On the left side, we have a package chaired by Eliodoro, which is basically about describing materials at all scales, from ab initio, quantum chemistry, from density functional theory, coarse grain, all the way to bridge the gap in the description of the materials from very small to a continuum. That will be relevant to give a rationale to the modelings of work package 4, which is about material, flow model, environmental fate, and in the end, those two PBPK model. And for both for external and internal distribution. And ultimately, work package 5 will be looking at the understanding of what is happening, integrating all these things to get the rationale and not only the models for a dose response modeling. In the next one, you can see that all these models are very broad. So we do need a way to integrate and to validate them to make sure they will engage in a seamless or as an efficient way as it is possible. On the next one, you can see like a general ideas. For instance, in material modeling, we are describing these nanomaterials, different kind of surfaces, like for instance, different kind of titanium oxides, different surfaces, how they may aggregate, how the environment or the body conditions affect their aggregation, that will ultimately affect the dispersion and reach, how they interact with proteins, how they interact with lipids, like the surface of the membranes, and that also closely generates data that go into work package 2, and at the same time we also bring a more comprehensive and ultimately efficient ontology of these materials. On the next one, you can see the kind of descriptors, new descriptors that are also generated by these materials modeling to help better predict and model the persistence in the environment, their aggregation, so that this will affect their outreach, and also the interaction with the environment and ultimately with the physiological targets. The following one, what you can see is, for instance, how we are modeling the nanomaterials, first in different environmental compartments, air, surface water, you name it. But at the same time, we are also connecting these to the PBPK models. And basically, the idea is to have all sorts of modelings within environment and ultimately reaching the body where, as you can see in the following one, what we make is basically to bring this rationale to better predict this dose response modeling. And that means getting into the molecular understanding of what is happening. And that stands with identifying like molecular initiating events, and from that point of view, what we are also is standing significantly on systems biology approach. On the following one, you can see that basically we have a big number of pillars that are closely entangled, and all of them integrate into this process of the model validation to bring a knowledge that we will share and put at the disposition of different kind of end users. And that is the idea of this sustainable NanoInformaTIX framework. And like you can see on the following one, and that is basically the platform, exactly. And again, the interface is the device. So the idea is to have a web-based platform that will connect all these databases and all these models, so that we can basically have access to materials, exposure, PBPK, quantitative structure activity relationships model, and also to be able to group the materials, to read across, so that this really help, mainly because the idea is also to have an active programming interface, which is easy and also intended for different kind of end users and with different kind of missions, like being able to predict, or to train model, or to validate model, and also to update models, because the idea is that we are integrating multiple databases. So this is kind of a modular approach, and each database can be enhanced, and at the same time we can also integrate new data sets, so that it will make it something that is sustainable in the very sense of operation, and it will be up to date. And if you click more, okay, basically that is our mission, just to endow the data with the value. Too much. One step back, please. Okay. No, but you're doing very well. Thank you so much. You could apply for this. So basically, it's the idea is basically to reduce or even minimize the use of animal experimentation in cell, trying to make even a cellular experiments, bring the rationale and the knowledge to be able to make materials which are safer by design, and of course, also the rationale to be able to group and classify the materials to better predict their properties. And well, basically, and that is the outcome. And this is basically, I believe that this is the last slide. lose track of myself for a moment. Yeah, okay, indeed. So I try to very generally and quite broadly show what is our mission. We're integrating very complementary tasks, and the outcome will be very nice, and you will be able to see things at our website. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Miguel. And for the audience, you can see we definitely did not promise you too much by saying we will give you a 10-minute introduction of every one of our different projects. We have a few minutes left for direct questions to Miguel before he needs to go, but I'm sure you can contact him at the details that you can find for him online or in the presentation, which will be made available to you. Any questions to Miguel? In the absence of questions, and maybe while people are typing and thinking about them, I have one for you. And I don't necessarily agree that the best equivalence of exposure to nanomaterials is a kick in the groin, as you seem to have suggested on an early slide, but I leave that up to you. That definitely hammered home the message of unforeseeable or foreseeable effect. But the question regarding the consolidation of data from different databases in one web-based platform now. So you illustrated very nicely the difference between missing data, data that was in part available, and then the green parts, which is data available. Where would you say are we in a total coverage of the data that we would like to have on nanomaterials? Where are we with regard to the gaps that are left?
Well, that's a pretty good question, because actually there is also significant gaps in many aspects. Some of the characterizations sometimes may not be totally relevant because, as I commented at the beginning, many characterization techniques are bulk, and the signal is dominated by the bulk. However, what the environment or what our body sees and what they really care about is the surface. And sometimes this surface is not like the bulk. It's by the end. It's actually the end of this bulk structure. So even the very characterization that we are having can be hampered by these factors. Some of them, of course, are surface relevant related parameters, and those are right. But others can be fooled by that. So this is something to touch base. And then when it comes to adverse effects, well, there are always some challenges, because sometimes you are bringing like so many disciplines at the same time that even when you are preparing a sample for cellular analysis, even when there is a very standard protocol, you may actually be altering the sample. So we have a lot of problems about stability of suspensions, how they will further affect or dissolve. So things cannot be that trivial. So there are gaps, and we also want to double check on some of the gaps, and modeling can actually suggest some of these things. And one of the missions that we also have in the validation package is actually to make some kind of touch-based experiment to benchmark things like that we can find that don't really make sense, or that maybe we are having some artifact that can be altering our experiments.
Super, thank you. There is also now a second question from the audience. I can see that Fleming typed that. Do you have a quick answer to that one? We're a little bit over time, but I'm not too worried about that just yet.
But I don't see the question here.
You can't see the question. Why can I see the question and you can't? Okay, I'll read it out to you. Fleming is...
I was looking at the chat and it was right in front of me.
Oh, sorry.
There are success story examples where the theory has been proven. I believe this is a question. Well, we're right now touching base, we're consolidating. We are at this moment, what we are doing is basically engaging the different kind of models and connecting like the material description or model migration with experimental flow models of the material. So basically what we are doing right now is to see that things are connecting well and that the different models don't squeak between them. So this is basically what we are doing now, is in this phase of validation and integration of them.
Super. Thank you very much, Miguel. And I believe we have to let you go to your next very important appointment. Many thanks for spending time with us and giving us an introduction. And I'd like to now go with 3 minutes delay, I'm afraid, to introduce Monique Groenewold to you from RIVM. Monique is the coordinator of the GovForNano project, but she will also provide an overview in the next 10 minutes of her sister projects, NanoRIGO and RiskGONE. Monique, the floor is yours. Hello.
Thank you so much, Steffi. Can you hear me clear? Yeah? Okay. Yes. Thank you so much. So thank you also for the opportunity to present to you today something about the governance projects where I'm one of the coordinators of. Steffi, are you dealing with the clicks to move forward?
Stella is a star slide advancer. She will do that.
Yes.
Okay.
So just let me know. I will do the clicks.
Okay, great. So to start with, I'm a representative of 3 of the European projects dealing with the challenge of improving the risk governance of nanomaterials. Next, please. Yes. So the other 2 projects is NanoRIGO and RiskGONE, and I'm the coordinator of GovForNano. So you may all be aware that within the context of the risks of nanotechnology, we are currently dealing with quite some issues there. Questions from society, but also from people dealing with risk assessment with respect to regulations, but also about questions from companies dealing with how to do innovation well. And all these questions, they don't have currently one overview of system where we can all go to. So next, please. The European Commission commissions 3 European projects to improve the governance of nanotechnology and nanomaterials. Next, please. So actually, our projects are dealing with involvement of making a NanoRisk Governance Council. That's the most important outcome of this project. And to do that all together, we are, besides this NanoRisk Governance Council, also making a new framework system to do that. That's the red part in this picture. And will also be a supporting infrastructure to make the decisions of the council be scientific supported. Next, please. So the important outcomes of these 3 projects working together on it will be self-sustained European NanoRisk Governance Council, and of course also a proof of concept that this process that we're dealing with is an effective process, and it will also be implemented, so an operational framework for that. There will be an entrance portal where all the information is available. And besides that, we also will demonstrate the function of the council. Next, please. So a lot of challenges ahead of us and also opportunities. But first of all, I think it's in this context of nanosafety cluster, I add value in it, that it's important for you to realize that we're not dealing with a static world. So it's actually a dynamic world that we are developing something in. So it's a research project, but we're dealing with issues in policy on a European level, on country levels, that we also have to realize how to be future-proof in such a way that we are building a system now that will also have, for future challenges, will be a solution, actually. For example, how to deal with new types of materials coming to the market, what we now call advanced materials. And we are handling issues like safe and sustainability by design. But how will that interfere with the current project that we are developing a system? So we realize we have to do something with all the research that has been done up till now. That's quite a lot, actually, in the nanosafety community. You might be all aware that there has been over 10 years of research of different kinds of materials, and also we have learned a lot about how to deal with that. But we also need to look at the future. There's also developments at the European policy level, being the Green Deal being put out there by the Commission. And also the chemical strategy for sustainability is an important part of it. So beside that policy infrastructure and force field, we also have to deal with a lot of organizations currently dealing with the risk assessment of nanomaterials. For example, an ECHA and EFSA, they all have their own responsibilities there. And like I said, there's a lot of research already done. Make sure that we use all the research that is of value that we can take for future problems. And of course, there's also the societal part of it. So a lot of questions, how can we take mainly consumers also, but also people dealing with innovation, get them better involved and solve the solutions that we have in a broader, coming from a broader context. So besides the European level, we also have to deal, of course, with our global context, being, for example, in standardization world, the OECD and ISO. So next to that, there's also another point that I want to raise to you. That is that this is not only a research project, but it's really an organization that we will put down there and needs to be sustainable for the long term. So we need to create actually added value. People have to see and know that what we're doing makes sense. Next, please. So I told you about the council and the framework that we're building. So to make all the information accessible, there needs to become a portal as well. Now, currently, there's no clear idea yet how we're going to shape that, but we know some things that we know is that this infrastructure needs to integrate academic, industry, and regulation information, and it also needs to support the decision-making of the framework and the council. So we are dealing with a lot of tools already being out there and still being developed, and that can be different kind of methods, models, or software. And there needs to be a central access point where this information can be accessible in a way that is usable for the different users. So currently, within the 3 projects, we're thinking how to organize this. How can we organize this such a way that all the information is available for the people need to deal with it, but also be supportive to the council and policymakers. Next, please. So an important part of giving access to information is also thinking about data management. So all 3 projects have their own goals and want to achieve progress to this respect. But I think there are some common understandings there. And we all know by now that if we want to have a broader base of having the right data there, we need to have a common agreement on how to achieve that. And by now, the FAIR principles being having data that is not only findable, accessible, and interoperable and reusable is a concept or an idea that is really taking to the ground in Europe now, and that helps us forward in having all the same standards on how we're collecting data and make them also interoperable. So we need computational platforms so we can have easy access and easy uploading of data, quality data, of course, and curated data also. So we already have quite some projects working on that. It's not starting from scratch. We can build on work, for example, from NanoCommons. And so right now we're working on it. The projects are currently halfway. So still a lot needs to be done. But right now we are working on the interoperability of some prioritized databases. And also there is a network built currently called the Advanced Nano Co-FAIR Implementation Network. That is a manifesto being put out there, and researchers and organizations can commit to this manifesto. And this way we're going to build all together on a more solid way of collecting and getting access to data. There needs to be a harmonization of terminology, of course. So that's something that a glossary has been built on or worked on. And we also need to think about how we can validate older data sets that we also can use them. Big challenge there. Next, please. Steffi, I think I used already quite a lot of time. Maybe I'll skip this one. It's a quite important part of the work we're doing. But so people can read it afterwards in the slides that they will be there. But a lot of work in the 3 projects is actually also done on getting scientific support for OECD test guidelines.
Thomas and Ma will talk about this right after you, so you are happy to skip over that.
Yeah, great. Next, please. So this one, yes, please, Stella, this one. So no, back, please. So by now you understand that the main purpose we're doing is building an organization, a council, a European Nanorisk Governance Council with a supportive framework. This needs to be an organization that can talk about chemicals one side, also on food and consumer use, so have the broad basis, needs to be an independent body and also a trustworthy body. That's easily said than done, because building trust is something that we're learning every day, I think. So we need to bridge between people that generate the knowledge and people that are making the decisions, and we need to be aware of service to all different kind of stakeholders. To make that work, we also need to test, optimize, and demonstrate this work, and we're going to do that through case studies. Next, please. Yes, Steffi is moving me forward. So maybe I'm going to finalize it then with the work that we're doing currently is really trying to get everybody on board in thinking about what kind of organization does that need to be. And where we are right now with the 3 projects is thinking about different options we have. So what you see in this slide is actually 4 different type of scenarios of councils that we could build. And we thought about how that will look like. And the coming months, we're going to talk about it with all people that want to talk to us about it. And in the beginning of next year, we're going to make a decision on what we're actually going to build and build a blueprint on how it's going to look like. And I think with this, so there are some slides behind it for people who are interested that can have a look at what are we going to do the next period. But I think I can stop also my presentation at this point. I hope it was satisfying enough for you and give you the information that you were looking for.
Dizzying amount of content. Thank you so much, Monique. Quite a challenge to put it all in such a small presentation, and for 3 projects as well. Do we have any questions to Monique? There is a question for you which reads, are there equivalents of the proposed NanoRisk Governance Council in existence for other types of chemicals?
No, not like we are doing that. There is, of course, the International Risk Governance Council, but that's a really organization dealing with all kinds of aspects of risk governance and not dealing with the chemicals specifically. And the main representative of the IRGC is actually thinking from the NanoRIGO project, where she's a partner with us in how we're going to bring and build it, that it's also connected to the IRGC where it's needed. Is that enough answer for Neil?
I hope so, because we have been, yes, Neil says yes, and that was the only correct answer to give, Neil, because we've run out of time, I'm afraid. But you know where you can find Monique and the other 3 projects. I encourage you to contact them directly. Thank you so much, Monique.
Sorry about all the time. Thanks a lot, Steffi.
Thank you. We are moving on to the presentation that was already introduced by Monique now, and that is the Malta project, specifically, or the Malta initiative, specifically embodied by 2 projects, NanoHarmony and NanoMet. So we are going to hand over to Germany and then France for the presentation of these 2 projects. I believe we have Thomas going first. Hello, Thomas.
Hello, Steffi, and thank you very much for the introduction. Can you hear me well?
We hear you very well.
That's good. So hello to everybody, and as you can see on the screen, I'm introducing to you the project of NanoHarmony. And in the beginning, I would like to introduce to you the nanoscale, and certainly there are different things we can look at nano, and that can be nanomechanics on the left-hand side, or nanostructures from the environment on the right-hand side, or in the middle, nanostructured material which are on purposely produced by industry and being, for example, here a construction material. And that actually is the focus of what NanoHarmony is about. We are talking about not the natural, but the man-made nanomaterials. The harmony for safe society is the other side of NanoHarmony, which means that we look for the safety for the environment, we look for the safety for humans, and that not only on local scale, but on large and global scale, so that we're looking for nano-safety, NanoHarmony testing for the safe use of nanomaterials. This is what NanoHarmony is working on. Background to NanoHarmony is certainly the background for chemical safety and biosafety on the OECD side, because we very closely collaborate with the OECD, and the sister project led by Mar and coordinated by Mar, presenting directly after this presentation. We both are very closely linked to work efficiently together towards test guidelines for use for testing and assessment of nanomaterials. So chemical safety and biosafety is first, and we certainly are in line with the chemical safety thinking of the EU, which is the background of the project as well, because of the registration of nanomaterials within REACH. We need safe testing and the characterization of nanomaterials. So here the chemical safety from the EU is background to the project, and this in close collaboration with the OECD, which assists countries in developing and implementing policies and instruments to allow the safe use of nanomaterials. Certainly, this is not only Bauer, this is width of project partners. In this case, we have 14 partners, but with these 14 partners, sorry for the wrong animation, but with these 14 partners, we also work very closely together with 24 other institutions and industries from outside of Europe as well. As testing should be done not only within a country or within Europe. With OECD, we are working closely together to have a worldwide harmonization, and to achieve that, all developments we do within NanoHarmony should be in line with other member countries of the OECD. And so we have close collaboration with South Korea, South Africa, Canada, the US, and so on. We have more than 24 institutions and industries wanting to join, and we have received quite a few already. So we have more than 15 partners being associated partners now from, all around the world. The sister project is NanoMet, which Mar is going to present here after. But the aim of the NanoMet project, in brief, is to coordinate OECD EU activities that support test guideline and guidance document development. And they are mainly working from the OECD point of view, and both OECD side, to ensure that we have a very close links within the procedures necessary for OECD, engaging the member countries and ensuring this kind of cooperation. NanoHarmony has 3, 4, 5 specific aims. One of them is certainly to support the development of the test guideline, to deliver the scientific background, but also to coordinate the scientific activities beyond NanoHarmony between the European project here in very close collaboration. You heard the presentation by Monique before, so with Go4Nano, where some of the developments are already also taking place in RiskGONE, NanoRIGO, other European projects working towards the common aim to have good testing guidelines. So here we do some coordination and facilitate the cooperation between the different projects with the OECD as well. The building of the long-term impact, here's the general structure of NanoHarmony. We certainly have an input on the left-hand side, NanoHarmony processing the input in the middle, and the way forward on the right-hand side. The right-hand side is clearly showing that OECD test guidelines is one aim, but we want also to improve the cooperation between scientists, industry, standardization bodies, and regulators. So far, very often, within European projects, we develop standard operation procedures, SOPs, and we think it's a very good way for testing and assessment of the safe use of nanomaterials, but the regulators don't pick them up. The regulators say, okay, we need something specific, and the scientists haven't done so, or can't develop within a timely manner a common procedure. So here we have communication, we have procedures, and we are trying to improve this kind of cooperation, so that we achieve a faster implementation of scientific results into regulation. As you can see on the left-hand side, we need quite a lot of cooperation here, that we can all work together with different stakeholders, with different organizations, with data we already have gained from European or national or international projects. So all that is necessary. As an example on what is ongoing now, you see some of the information we have collected, like which type of test guideline guidance document is worked on, who is going to sponsor this kind of development, is it an EU project, is it a national body, or is it industry who is going to sponsor this development, and which lead country at OECD is backing up this kind of development and is coordinating that on the OECD. Overall, we have more than 20 contributions which are listed currently in these ongoing activities towards test guideline and guidance documents, and we keep and update this list regularly and make it available in the near future to all of us. So within NanoHarmony, we have these 3 work packages as mentioned here. Work package 1, where we have all the specific work towards a specific test guideline. And we have work package 2, stakeholder involvement, and work package 2.3, development of a structure to translate science into test methods used in regulation. So as you can see at the bottom line of this graph, our aim is really to work and bridge research, harmonized assessment and regulation, and to a certain degree, certainly with legislation, because regulation is the part putting into place and making it workable what legislation is asking for. This can be debated and how legislation and regulation are viewed, but this is one of the ways you can interpret the terms legislation and regulation. So how do we do that? We promote cooperation at international level for practical regulative use and internationally accepted guidelines. We involve and ask for commentaries by all stakeholders from research, regulation, industry, governments, and NGOs. And we do that by regular video conferences, meetings, and telephones for expert group for the specific task being worked on, specific test guideline. We have workshops for comprehensive international exchange, like we had on 3rd to 5th of November. Quite successful workshop on gap analysis and work towards data need identification and test guidelines. Webinars to provide information and encourage the participation of interested groups. Networking of the projects, as already mentioned. Analysis of the process for the development of test guidelines to improve the flow of information for targeted cooperation, shortening the development time. And certainly, we are working on the development of a platform or process to use this also in the long term for future development. And this is done what Monique already said with the other risk governance projects, certainly is done in cooperation with the risk governance project so that we achieve some long-term impact which facilitate this kind of exchange. There are certainly some other activities coming up. You can follow that one on the webpage of nanoharmony.eu. So participation is very much welcome. And if you'd like to have some more information, and with the distribution of the slides, you see some YouTube links, and there's some other information coming up from the workshop on our webpage, where you can actually see what is done within the different test guideline developments, what are the overarching discussions ongoing, for example, on dissolution and solubility. So these parts can be all looked up, and you can inform yourself about the project pretty easily. With that, I thank you, and I think I pass on to Mar before there are any other questions coming up. Is that correct, Steffi?
Super plan. Thank you so much. Yes, if we could have Mar's contribution first. We are running terribly late now, but we're going to hear all of you out. I hope we can remain a little bit longer. I'm not quite sure if Stella is going to kick us out, but if we can switch over to Mar, and then maybe both Thomas and Mar take questions at the same time. Mar, do you want to advance your slides yourself, or do you want the silent interaction that Stella and I just had over which slide we're supposed to be on? Hello. Can you hear us? Oops. We cannot hear you, Mar.
Mar, you should be able to unmute yourself by clicking just below the cameras that you see. There is a red.
Now better?
Yes.
So, an apology. I just got, of course, at this precise moment, a message that I need to re-upload the system. But I think if you can move the slide up to be on the safe side, and I will be using 2 seconds of your time. I know that we're late, but thank you so much for the previous presentation. I think this one fits very well with the 2 previous ones. So I just want to take a couple of minutes to explain what is this NanoMet and how this fits in the OECD. So if you want to go to the next slide. So you know that at the OECD we have we implement the OECD guidelines for the testing of chemicals. So there are a collection of internationally agreed testing methods used by governments, industry, and independent laboratories to assess the safety of chemicals. So the same goes for nanomaterials. The OECD are primarily used, as I mentioned, for regulatory safety testing and subsequent chemical notifications and registrations. Okay, so this is why we try to update it as new information becomes available. We have 2 programs at OECD looking at test guidelines. The OECD program on manufactured nanomaterials really bringing the expertise on nano, and the test, yes? Yeah. And the test guidelines that is really a set of national coordinators that are making sure that all the test guidelines are harmonized and are coherent from a regulatory point of view. We had a series of new test guidance documents proposed by countries, including the 2 projects that you have, the projects that you have mentioned right before me, such as NanoHarmony and Go4Nano. So the Commission kindly approved to a project called NanoMet, which is really to intensify this endeavor and to make sure that at the OECD ends, we have the necessary resources to cope with the amount of information and documents coming at our end. So if you want to go to the next slide, please. So this is just to remind you how it works. So you have all the research that, as was mentioned by Thomas right before, coming from different projects. So it could be Go4Nano, NanoHarmony, a lead country that is implementing a test guidelines, etc. That is bringing their information and their knowledge, their draft test guidelines, guidance documents to the OECD site, where there are a lot of round of comments between experts, regulators, industry, national animal welfare organization, and NGO to find a common agreement on what are the most important elements that need to be included in these documents so they can be used by all the different regulatory frameworks in OECD countries. So if you want to go to the next slide. So the previous one, I think, voila. This is just to tell you what is going on right now. So you have all the different documents and projects that are underway that have already been received and approved at the OECD site. So what we're trying to do with NanoMet is mainly to make sure that there is a good coordination between all these different projects, that there is communication, that there are no overlaps, and that they can be good complements in the puzzle. So if you want to go to the next one, there are some specific documents for nanomaterials that have already been published, yet we still have to make sure that in developing these test guidelines for nanomaterials, they are in coherence with the test guidelines existing documents for chemicals in general. So this is where we invite you really, if you're interested and you're following up on this more closely, to look at the existing documents that we have in the OECD public site. And just to finalize, just to finalize, if you want to go to the next slide, if you have any question, you can of course contact me. But the whole point about NanoMet and the OECD is the same, is really to ensure and facilitate a smooth exchange between all the scientists, like those involved in the project that were mentioned before. And sometimes they're the same scientists. We have some good overlaps which ensure harmonization and good communication, but that there is also a good exchange with the regulators that are going to be using the test guidelines and the guidance document for regulatory purpose. So I think I can leave it there. Steffi, I hope I didn't take too much time. Thanks.
You were perfect. Thank you very much, Mom. I can see that we have no questions yet in the chat, but Sean kindly posted the next NanoHarmony workshop development for nanomaterial next generation interaction in the chat, so you can follow up on that one. There you go. Ma and Thomas, just one question to you, because nobody leaves here without a question. So, a huge work program for the duration of your two parallel projects, both running for how long? 2 or 3 years, and no matter if 2 or 3 years, but where do you think this is going to leave us with regard to covering all possible nanomaterials with all possible guidelines? What happens after your projects?
Thomas, do you want me to give it a try?
Yes.
I think what we have for the NanoMet side is we have secure funds to have, like, let's say, more resources to cope with the flow of projects that we had on nanomaterials. We are hoping that by the end of these 3 years, so NanoMet started in May, beginning of May. By the end of these 3 years, we will already have a good set of test guidelines and guidance documents ready for approval. Some of them have already been approved, which is the guidance document 317 and the guidance document and the test guideline, no, the guidance document 318, sorry. So I think in terms of the OECD side, we will continue trying to implement these test guidelines. I think we are getting to a point where we have a better sense of what are the different aspects that will be needed to be covered. But as I said, I mean, the OECD test guidelines program will, in general, not only for nano, it's about updating and including the state of the science as it becomes available. So this is an ongoing project. I think we have work to do for quite some time.
Thank you. Thomas, anything to add?
Maybe just 1 or 2 points to add. It's something like the main test guidelines and guidance documents being currently worked on will be finalized, but there may well be a few ones which take a little bit longer. If we look into surface chemistry, we can only touch some of the issues really related to surface chemistry and characterization. And then there are a few other topics. On relevance, regulators have to decide, but there are some other topics which may not be ready within the next 3-4 years.
Thank you. So this will be with us for quite some time, and people know how to interact by the links that have been posted and looking up your presentations and links. Thank you very much to both of you. We are running about 6 minutes late, but I do hope we can squeeze all that in. I don't want to cut anybody short. All of this is very relevant and interesting. I'd like to hand over to Antreas, who will talk to us about the NanoSolveIT project, which is a sister project to the first one that we saw presented by Miguel. Antreas.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon also from my side. I'm Antreas, Afantitis, as Steffi mentioned. I'm the Managing Director of NanoMechanics Ltd. NanoMechanics is a cheminformatics and NanoInformaTIX company. I'm also the coordinator of the Horizon 2020 project NanoSolveIT. The particular project aims to the development of innovative and integrated tools for the silico risk assessment and then development of safe and design approaches for nanomaterials. Today, I will present NanoSolveIT objectives as well as our achievements so far, since now the project is on the 2nd year. Okay. NanoSolveIT is a 6 million project that under the H2020 NanoInformaTIX call, and one of the main goals of the project is to advance nanoinformatics methods in a multi-scale framework to bridge the gap between scientific excellence and regulatory and industrial needs. During the first period of the project, we have already achieved several nanoinformatics models for the modeling. Through the modeling prediction of nanomaterial seizure, assisted by advanced machine learning and artificial intelligence techniques, we have identified the crucial nanomaterial fingerprints that can lead us to safe and design principles for nanomaterials. Special focus was given to user-friendly interfaces for our models with clear documentation, well-defined applicability domains, and emphasis to regulatory compliance and diverse stakeholders. Next one, please. Sorry, I can change. Okay, thanks. Okay, NanoSolveIT aspires to introduce a groundbreaking in silico integrated approach to testing and assessment, and IATA, for the environmental health and safety of nanomaterials. This IATA will be implemented through a decision support system packaged as both of standalone open software and via a cloud platform. Our project is now more than 20 months old, and I'm very glad to say that we have already achieved a lot of, and of course, more challenges are ahead of us that we'll need to cover. Is it possible to change the slide, please? Because I'm trying, no, okay. To deliver what we have promised, we have a very strong consortium with experts in nanosafety and nanoinformatics. NanoSolveIT consortium consists 16 partners from 12 European countries and 8 international partners from United States of America, Australia, South Africa, Japan, and South Korea. NanoSolveIT partners have already established close collaboration with US experts, delivering the EU-US nanoinformatics roadmap, thus ensuring effective international cooperation. To further maximize international cooperation, the project advisory board includes internationally recognized experts who will oversee and ensure attainment of project goals, including benchmarking and validation of the models. Next one, please. We have established agreements with international institutions outside of our consortium. For instance, Health Canada and Oregon State University that will provide us nanomaterials datasets for modeling and for hosting to our databases. Our international partners have already provided us data, and based on them, we have developed and published several nanoinformatics models. Next one, please. Here is an overview of our work plan within NanoSolveIT. The first year is the knowledge infrastructure, the work package 1, which will collect, curate, and ontologically annotate the experimental data produced in work package 2 or are available through public repositories of other nanosafety projects to support and guide the development of informative nanomaterial fingerprints and computational predictive methods. In a second tier, we have the 3 modeling work packages. Comprehensive questionnaires will be formulated with the full characterization of nanomaterials. And finally, in the third tier, the IATA and the work package 6, the different types of the development and informatics models will be integrated and linked to the molecular initiative event and the key event in AOPs, and eventually predict the activation of AOPs and the final adverse outcomes. The final models will be available through the NanoSolveIT cloud platform in the work package 7. Next one, please. Our NanoSolveIT knowledge base is now available and will allow data sharing and use. Our knowledge base is compatible also with a continuation of existing knowledge platforms. The NanoSolveIT knowledge-based infrastructure builds upon existing infrastructure and ontology and uses APIs also developed with previous projects to ensure that information can be fully exploited for in silico nanosafety assessment. Next one, please. Thank you. Our toxicogenomics modeling, besides identification of the AOPs and the molecular initiating events, involves also COVID-related research, and the first results were published recently in the Nano Today. Next one, please. NanoSolveIT promotes and supports the development of the safe by design approaches. Our vision is to offer predictions without the need of any experimental input, utilizing only knowledge of system structure and composition. Next one, please. NanoSolveIT ambition is to advance nanoinformatics well beyond the state of the art by developing and implementing innovative techniques and tools that will be integrated within NanoSolveIT IATA and then incorporated into a sustainable and interpretable product, the NanoSolveIT platform, which will become an essential element for supporting industrial and regulatory nano-risk governance, and the anticipated Nano-Risk Governance Council established in the EU NMBP 13 projects, the three projects that we have mentioned before. Next one, please. So far, the following type of models are available in NanoSolveIT cloud platform. Several nano-QCR models, biokinetics models, deep learning models, bioinformatics models, exposure models, and environmental fate models. Next one, please. Among these, I would like to highlight the development of a deep learning model for predicting the effect of exposure to exposure of nanomaterials on Daphnia magna that was recently published in a small journal. This model has been released within NanoSolveIT cloud platform with a user-friendly interface. Next one, please. On the exposure modeling, I would like to draw your attention to a user-friendly graphical interface for a multi-box model that simulates occupational exposure. This human exposure model is also included within NanoSolveIT cloud platform and will be integrated within NanoSolveIT IATA. Next one, please. The nanophase water soil organism model that predicts the fate and the biouptake across space and time of nanomaterials entering the soil and the aquatic environment has also been integrated with our NanoSolveIT cloud platform and is now available for integration with other tools. Next one, please. Computational descriptors based on atomistic simulation. No, the previous one, please. Okay, thanks. Computational descriptors based on atomistic simulations were also used to predicting cytotoxicity of metal oxides of nanoparticles that has been retrieved from the S2Nano database. The particular model is already hosted at the NanoSolveIT cloud platform and have been published recently in Nanomaterials journal. Next one, please. NanoSolveIT work has been published so far in several of the top journals in the field, and more information of for all NanoSolveIT publications. All of them are collected in the relevant site under library of our website. Next one, please. Also, I would like to highlight the work that we have performed with our international partners and has been already published. Next one, please. NanoSolveIT established close collaboration with several project and stakeholders in the nanosafety ecosystem. Okay, one more. Okay, our vision is to deliver long-lasting impact and sustainability beyond project lifetime and maximize the take-up of new tools, platforms, and nanomaterial hazard and risk assessment systems developed either individually or as part of system solution with modules selected as needed basis. Also, during the previous week, you have seen several presentations about NanoSolveIT and how we can link material characteristics to adverse outcomes. It was achieving a framework which is able to predict human environmental hazards, will further validated through several case studies. Through several round-robin experiments, experimental and computational, agree standards by following OECD principles will increase the confidence in NanoInformaTIX model. Next one, please. More information can be found at nanosolveit.eu, and you can contact us anytime at our email, and you can follow us at Twitter, ResearchGate, and LinkedIn. Thank you. Thank you for your attention. I'm available if there are any questions.
Thank you so much, Andreas. And I'm sorry for my confusion of our diligent slide advancer, Stella, in the background. I was running out of sign language, so I've now resorted to holding up signs to you and not doing the forward sign anymore, because that was for Stella before. Any questions to Andreas? If not, I have one for you, and that is, since you're a sister project of the one that Miguel presented earlier, and it's not really fair to only have you online and be asking you that question, but for somebody who comes along and who's working in the field and who is gathering data, and I know your and Miguel's projects are all about cleaning data and endorsing data and fitting it all into one platform. Who do I speak to? Either one of you, or are you joining your platforms? Are you gathering it all into one format? How does it work if I wanted to make sure my data was taken into consideration by you?
Yes, currently we have different platforms, and I would like to suggest to you to contact both of us, and the two projects are following different techniques. Of course, we are in communication in order to align also our activities, but I would like to suggest you to contact both of us and discuss particularly your problem, and to present to you what tools are available in our project in order to solve it.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you very much, Andreas. And any further questions can be followed up. The slides will be made available, and you have all the contact and click through to the relevant project. So in order to make up some time, I'm handing over immediately to Keld. Keld will be talking to us about a project that has ended already, but that is no less relevant and important to the entire topic we're discussing just now. So Keld, please.
Thank you very much, Steffi, and thanks a lot for being flexible to allow me to be here to give the presentation about caLIBRAte. So what I'm going to talk about today is the caLIBRAte web-based NanoRISK Innovation Governance Framework, which came out of the project call from the EU Commission in NMBP 30, considering the next generation tools for risk governance of nanomaterials. Next slide, please. So the background for running this project was, at this time, the existing risk assessment methodologies were not suitable for nanomaterials, and they were not able to keep up the pace with the newly developed or assessing the newly developed materials and nanomaterials. And we should come up with something that could meet this challenge and evolve or basically follow the rapidly evolving technology and make analysis of risk possible during the current innovation of nanomaterials. So the challenge was to us to set up a state-of-the-art and flexible risk banding tool that was the wish from the Commission to keep up with the pace of developments in nano innovation and risk research, and we should include stakeholders' risk concerns and perception in our development. So we should try to get to a better understanding on what was the risk perception among the different groups of stakeholders. And in fact, then the research was asked to focus on the testing, on the calibration, and further development of risk assessment or prioritization tools, focusing mostly on the qualitative tools. But we should cover both human and environmental risks. Excuse me. Next slide, please. So the initial idea for our project was to try and improve the confidence in the risk assessment for as basically a basis for more trustworthy risk communication and governance by trying to align along a so-called Cooper stage gate idea to launch model, so an innovation funnel where risk assessment is built into the development process, where risks are considered during each stage of the development process. So it could be linked up to, for example, the emerging risk management framework that was also launched at that time, and as well as the ISO 31000. And we try to stay close to some of the existing frameworks to not come up with a completely new framework for industry, but we try to develop something that was more familiar to them. To be able to increase trust in risk communication, we needed to have better validated tools. So basically, tool validation was key to reach the confidence of the emerging and established risk management procedures. And of course, we needed to align with the user needs and capacities. And that's something that we found was very important and changed our picture a little bit about what we wanted to, or what we ended up with in the end. Next slide, please. So this is one slide just giving an example of some of the input we got from stakeholders. For example, we made a survey on where they felt was at highest risk, who or what is at highest risks, and we found a quite clear picture that most found that worker health and environment was at highest risk, even though the civil society was a little bit more concerned about the risk overall. They looked more into, or also felt that both the ethical and social domain, the public health and animal health, was also at risk, but was not so concerned about economic aspects. We also we asked them what the stakeholders, basically what were the main drivers for using tools for risk governance, and most of the aspects was really about improving the human and environmental risk assessment or safety assessment, and to a lesser extent cost-benefit analysis, for example. But of course, this depends a lot on who you ask and who gives the answer to these questions. Next slide, please. So based on the input we received, we established the Nano Risk Governance Portal, which had a key objective about basically establishing a central site where we could gather or link out to validated information, or what we felt is trustworthy information, results, and tools to support nanorisk innovation governance, and also try to develop a system or platform where researchers and industry can also manage their nanorisk assessment and management and the overall governance during the nano innovation and production. So here's an example from the public pages where we cover different aspects, which are generic information needs from the public in general. For example, one feature is a horizon scanning tool, which can show what is trending in nano, focusing on specific search items or fixed search items. So it's just a picture of information gathered on the theme of nanotechnology. And one of the things we could see with this tool, for example, was a peak during the time when the REACH regulation came into force just before January 2020. We could see there was a rise in policy and regulations and other aspects related to risk assessment of nanomaterials. And today we can see that there's more focus about collaboration between industries and data to that extent also, or to some extent also. Next slide, please. We also have a so-called R&D and industry zone in the portal where we provide more industry relevant, R&D relevant information. For example, a typical question that we meet when we meet industry is, do I actually work with nanomaterials? And this is kind of key to start the whole process about making a nanospecific risk assessment. We have fact sheets and also link out to important sites such as the EU-ON and also the eReads tool developed by colleagues in Denmark about nanospecific REACH regulation and what are required for chemicals legislation in REACH. Next slide, please. As part of the member area, we have collected a lot of information about tools and some guidance, and also link out to data libraries. And this is all something that is in continuous development. So this is the starting frame of a system that can support a nano risk assessment or an innovation governance project. The tool library, for example, only contains tools that we have been evaluating through a process of stakeholder alignment and testing against data to the extent possible. Next slide, please. One of the tools that we have in the system is covering our NanoRisk governance framework, and that is the so-called NanoRisk governance project portfolio, which is a tool to run innovation projects and their governance from idea to launch, and also during subsequent launch, so market surveillance. Next slide, please. So the framework that we built and the tool that we have is based on a two-layer structure that basically follows the ISO 21505 project program and portfolio management guidance on governance. And again, we try to align with existing frameworks to make it more adaptable to the known environments for the industry. So our governance system has a governance management layer where an accountable person or governance board is running or managing a governance project, and to make the important go, rework, or stop decisions. And then we have an operational project layer where all the requested or required governance projects are run to generate the information that is needed to run the overall governance project. Next slide, please. If we try to give a picture on this following the stage-gate innovation funnel that I talked about in the beginning, we basically have this two-layer structure. In green, the governance board or governance manager, and in orange, we have the project layer. So the project layer has the job to define the management layer has the job to define the criteria, set the projects, questions, and score the answers, and decide whether the project is running. And you have the project layer to run the projects and gain the knowledge and generate the reports to the governance layer. And we developed a guidance to lead both the governance board and the project leaders to run the process of the innovation governance. Next slide, please. Thank you, Steffi. And just to focus on the innovation risk assessment and management framework, we built up a system that is ISO 31000-like, where we have information gathering, and then we have the pre-risk assessments of the occupational downstream user / consumer, the environmental pre-risk assessment, definition of risk of a fire and explosion, and so forth, considering the whole process of the ISO 31000 cycle, where you end up doing documentation and training to the workers in your factory. In the green dot, we have all the situations where we can consider a safer by design or stop cycle to see if we can improve safety of the material and safety of the product and safety of the production during the entire process. And next slide, please. So currently we have equipped the system with a number of tools that you see here to the right, covering the NanoRisk radar and different risk assessment tools that cover different stages of knowledge, from early knowledge to late knowledge. And then we have decision support systems like the Leica nanoscan, a Swiss precautionary matrix, and some decision support tool to support the overall evaluation of results. Last slide, please. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you, Steffi, for the strict direction.
We should go to the circus. Thank you very much, Keld. Do we have any questions directly for Keld? If not, I have one while Stella is changing over the slides to Iseult so that we can make up some time. Keld, your project is over and you have a fabulous platform with many different tools in it. I understand that some of them have been handed over to the RiskGONE project and will be maintained in other projects. But what about all those that are not directly gone into running projects? How long will those be available to us, and what is the plan with that?
Well, our system was set up to build on existing tools and try to get them validated, so we could have a matrix of tools supporting different stages of innovation. So currently, the responsibility of maintenance is under the different project or tool owners, and this is pretty much reflecting what is also existing on the current market regarding all risk assessment tools. I think that one of our major challenges in running platforms like this and the continuation that we have into Gov4Nano in our case, to some extent at least, is that still the long-term picture on sustainability is still a bit blurry. So we need to figure out well, basically, how can we handle this? Because I don't think there's a financial market to cover all the multitude of products that we have been developing. So this is a big risk in what has been achieved and how it can continue in the future.
Yeah, super. But I do wish you all the best that your tools survive and are maintained until the point when we find a new home for them, because they're all very useful indeed. And that means without further ado, I'm handing over to our last speaker, last but not least, Iseult. I've been told that we can overrun by about 5 minutes, which means if you start now, we will be perfect on time. Thank you very much.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, Steffi. And I just realized I forgot to put my name on my slides, but I think I've presented so many times in the last week or so that I've totally forgotten. But most of you, I think, know who I am and know how to reach me anyway. So I'm coordinating the NanoCommons project, which is a nanosafety research infrastructure. And for the purposes of the governance working group, I thought I'd focus on some of the things we're doing around data management, predictive tools for nanotoxicity and nanosafety, and for risk assessment. So it's really going to be a whistle-stop fly-through, so do feel free to get in touch if there's any details you'd like. Next slide, please. Or maybe I can do it myself if I'm in the screen. There we go. Yeah. Okay. So as a research infrastructure project, NanoCommons has three main pillars of activity. So it undertakes research to develop the infrastructure. It undertakes community building activities to identify what the community needs and how we can address it. And then it provides access, funded access, through to the different services that we're developing. And the services are currently grouped under support for data management in terms of experimental workflows. So how you actually do the data management component of your data generation, tools for data processing and analysis, tools for data visualization and predictive toxicology, and then tools to support online storage and accessibility and making your data fair, etc. So a key component of NanoCommons and the knowledge base is this idea of the semantic model. So it isn't that we're trying to pull all data into one source. That's neither feasible nor the most energy efficient nor the most time efficient solution. The idea is that data goes into the most appropriate database. So there's already a lot in eNanoMapper and many projects are using that. We're encouraging people to do that. There's already a lot in the NIC on the US side, and again, keep doing that if that's the most appropriate one. And also our omics data goes into omics databases, etc. And then what the NanoCommons semantic model does is that it maps how each of the different databases organize their data so that then we're able to integrate and compare like with like. And then linking up with both graphical user-friendly interfaces that are easy for those of us who get panicked when we hear the term GitHub, and using the APIs, which are basically the application programming interfaces that allow databases to communicate. So the idea then is that all of the data will be searchable through whatever platform you go into, and you won't know what the system is doing behind it and where it's pulling data from. You'll just get the data that you've requested in a format that's useful for you. So then it's really about coupling data and applications. So As I said, the semantic model is the core of it. And then we'll integrate details on particle characteristics, classical toxicology, so that's the zebrafish, of course, with molecular omics data, but then also going a step further and integrating computational knowledge. So we're now able to design and build computational materials. So with no experiment needed, just all computational. And then we can probe their behavior of those as well and use that to further build up the knowledge and the data that we have for safe by design, etc. And then all sorts of post-processing, so the network interference, data analysis, biomarker profiles, fingerprints, etc. So all of that is being brought together then to be able to probe and query. So this is the link to it, and it's sort of, we've got a fairly straightforward way to upload data, to download data. The various tools are starting to be integrated, and then of course the building of and expanding the ontologies, which is another core component of what NanoCommons is doing. And it's building on some of the data sets from early FP7 projects, all the data that we're processing and curating ourselves and in partnership with NanoSolveIT. It's also building in all the experimental and computational data from Smart Nanotox and a number of other projects who've applied for transnational access to get support in terms of their data management. I also have the OECD on there because we're also just at the minute integrating all of the data that was mined for the Nano AOP activity. So that's all going to be available as well. And I'm not going to go through all the details, but just to sort of say there's, you know, the data set is growing very rapidly and is highly complementary to eNanoMapper. It isn't trying to do the same thing as eNanoMapper. It has a different approach and a different set of projects that it's working with. And it is communicating at the API level with eNanoMapper. So the idea is it doesn't really matter where you put your data. NanoCommons will still enable you to query that all those different data sets. And that, as a research infrastructure, that's really what its goal is, to connect up all the bits. So then just to really very briefly talk about the data life cycle. So we're really trying to develop tools for each step in the experimental workflow. So from planning your data through the data acquisition, through the manipulation, and that's sort of the cleaning of the data, any pre-processing, through the analysis, the storage, and the making the data fair. And we've just published a paper in the Nanomaterials special issue on all of that, so I'm not going to spend any longer on it. And there's a recording, I think, from the training day, no, this is from the education day, I think, last week, on that has more detail on it. One of the things we're doing a lot with is these electronic lab notebooks. So part of that experimental workflow is getting your protocols in place, the tools to capture your data, all the steps in your workflow, and being able to pull, you know, you can have the same dispersion protocol, you can pull in the lists of all the existing materials. So the JRC reference materials are all in there and so on. So really sort of supporting this idea of organizing your data from the very beginning before you do your experiments, so that it's already in a format that can then be aligned with the databases, so that the curation and annotation are done in parallel to generating the data. This one is just very briefly, we're also working to develop, so the INCHI is a standard representation for chemicals. That allows you to distinguish one from another and to pull data sets together from different studies. And we've been working for the last year or so to build a nanomaterials extension to that. So we have the reviewers' comments back from that now, and we will be resubmitting it within the next few days. So the idea again is that it'll start sort of as identifying a group of materials, but then as you specify the different sublayers will allow us to get more and more specifically down to an individual nanoform. So it's also really trying to support the concept of nanoforms and being able to identify data that's related to one nanoform versus another. And it's also then going to allow us to sort of also be able to take into account nanomaterials that are dispersed. So there's also been some work to develop a mixture INCHI, where you could maybe have, you know, 4% of particles in a specific dispersion. So that's a really exciting development that we're really pleased with, and again will be hugely useful in terms of integrating data sets and being sure that they're the same. We've also been building on existing risk assessment tools and putting them together with a user-friendly interface. So, for example, the exposure models, we've been integrating some of the ones from Keld's group, for example, PBPK models developed by the group at NTUA, and integrating those again to give overall risk assessments, and that can pull data then directly from the models, and also then from the knowledge base, and can feed the data back into the knowledge base as well. And then just, I think probably one of the last things, so then some of the more exotic tools as well. So, for example, corona modeling maybe is not yet part of an overall risk assessment, but we're increasingly recognizing that understanding and mapping the biomolecules that are bound to the nanoparticle is an important piece maybe of predicting attachment to cells and then potentially uptake and internalization. So again, for each material, we can start to have the predicted coronas and things integrated. So increasingly integrating and then all of the computational data as well. So then you can pull down information like this, so more detailed analyses. So then in terms of just next steps and things that we're working on, and really to sort of facilitate risk governance, a key activity that's underway at the moment, and that's sort of building on the Gracious wiki that they developed to sort of go in parallel with the ontology, is using that wiki then to start adding terms that are missing, so to extend the eNanoMapper ontology, so adding computational terms, adding terms related to models, to adverse outcome pathways, and to risk governance. And using the wiki then to build that consensus on the terms, and then allowing on-the-fly application. So while terms are being developed, we can use them anyway. And then once they're formalized, the database will be able to integrate them. We're also developing tools for harmonizing the MODA template. So this is from the EMMC, the European Materials Modeling Council. So trying to develop ways to make these more standardized and reducing the reliance on free text, because the more free text we have, the more error prone things are and the less searchable. And then we're working with a really strong push at the moment to add computational materials and data into the knowledge base, with the overall goal that the project, that NanoCommons overall should help other projects enhance the legacy of their data sets as well through enhanced open and fair data. And then I think that's just to say, the thanks to all the partners who are in it, and various things that are ongoing that people can get involved with or ask to hear more about. So I think I stuck to time pretty much.
Perfect timing, and I can see, thank you so much, Iseult, and I can see that Keld has posted a question. While Stella is bringing that up, I can read it out to you. How do we handle the validation part of toxicological data? Is it probably still difficult to translate in vitro toxicological and in silico data to DNL and exposure, that the value, there you go.
The values really count in the end. I'm not sure I'm the best person to answer that. So if Antreas is still around, he might be able to help as well. But in large part, the validation of the models, you mean, or the validation of the data that's going into them, Keld? So in terms of validating the data that we use the Ort-Gils score and the various extensions that the models and the data output. Okay, sorry, yeah. So again, the better the quality of the data that goes in, the higher the quality of the data that comes out of them. But for all of the models, we're developing them as closely as we can with the OECD guidance on development of models. And a very strong part of that is documenting the hypothesis or the grouping basis, or the underpinning basis of the model, documenting all the data, documenting all of the statistical that it fits all the criteria. And for example, with QSARs, it's using the QMRF reporting template. And with other models, it's using the MODAs and things. So we really are trying to support that development of the steps that are needed to enhance the confidence in the models and to enable them then to be validated in due course through ECVAM, for example. So that is the route for all alternative tests, is through ECVAM. And a key part of that is having them fully documented, both in terms of the hypothesis that was used in the model and the data sets that were used into it. So it is more steps towards the set of data to be used for the RA. So it is more the steps towards the set of data. A lot of it comes back to the data, because we know with all models that, you know, the better the quality of the data, or the more extensive the data set, the better tuned the model is. But we are also, in nano area in particular, innovating quite a bit in how we do the gap filling, how we do the read across and things. So yeah, I'm not sure if what the last bit really means, Keld.
You seem to have solved it. Thank you. And I can see that Tassos is typing as well. There you go. More questions. Yes. One from Tassos. I would have thought that the two of you are working so closely. I
think he's just trying to clarify what I didn't say very articulately. So thank you, Tassos. Exactly. We are working very closely. Yeah, so it really is following the OECD principles for model development. And a lot of what we will do will also feed through into the NanoSolveIT IATA. And as part of the validation for that, we have agreed that we would submit 2 IATA case studies to the OECD IATA case study project to try and have them validated that way, and at the very least to get constructive feedback as to what additional steps would be needed to get it validated. So we are, you know, as Keld well knows, it is a really key piece of this, that if the models aren't validated, they won't be used. So it's a focus we have in everything we're doing.
Super. Thank you very much, Iseult. And I'd like to ask Stella to just briefly bring up the last slide of my own presentation from the beginning again, while I'm saying thank you to everybody again. Thrilling speakers. And Tassos just hammered one message home, and that is that we also need to thank all these many diligent people behind every one of the presenters who made the projects and their results available and made them available to us and presented. So many thanks to all of the projects, to all of the presenters. You will get the slides, you have all the details. And one of the things that I can post to you now, if that now works, is that if you don't do anything else, you may, I meant to copy the mailing list in there, but if you go to the website of the Nanosafety Cluster Working Group G, if you want to be involved a little bit more and find out from us, then subscribe to the mailing list and join us anytime again, or write directly to one of our presenters. And that leaves me to say thank you, and to just quickly mention the project that funded me to be here today, and that is in part Gov4Nano, but it is also to some extent the NanoFabNet project. And many thanks to Stella for a fabulous organization in the background. Thank you.
Thank you, Steffi. Thank you very much to all the presenters, and thanks for the perfect timekeeping. Actually, we're just 5 minutes behind schedule, so let us use these 5 minutes to take a little bit of rest, and we come back in 5 minutes again when we will start the next session on science diplomacy. Thanks again, everyone.
Perfect.
I'm just saying hello and thanks to the science diplomacy people. Hi, Iseult. Thank you so much to my speakers who are coming up. As you see, we'll wait for participants to come back here. And I hope Stella's taking her mini break too.
Thank you, Claire. Yes, we are just waiting 5 minutes to start the session. I see you. I see that I don't see Lorenzo yet, I guess. But yeah, okay, I see him now. So yeah, let us just use the 3 minutes and we come back. Okay?
Great. Okay, fine. I see Lorenzo. I see Rasmus, Sean, Christina. Probably Adrienne. Yes, Adrienne. Just looking for your names through the... And Antonino. Do I see Nino? Depends on how you've written your name. Here's Lorenzo.
Hello.
Hi there. Speakers, you see that underneath the these little video squares where Lorenzo and I appear, when Stella gives you the chance to be a speaker, underneath this these video squares, you will find your buttons to turn on and off your video and your audio. I think, Lorenzo, when you came in, you had to first sort of accept all of the settings, didn't you?
Yes.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So Stella will be passing the presentation mode to the speakers as your time comes.
Good. In the meantime, I must turn off my camera, right?
Sure. Also, to my speakers, if you want to move your video square, get it out of the way, you have the far right button under your video square is called dock, and that means that it'll push it up into a corner. It'll get it off your slides.
So thanks very much, Claire, for giving a little bit of guidance to your speakers. I'm pretty sure that they'll be doing fine. And now actually it's 10 past 3 p.m. So we need to start. I wish to now say a very, very warm welcome to Claire May, who will be chairing the session on science diplomacy, a new way of thinking about your role in a community of research. Thanks, Claire, and now the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Stella. Thanks for everything you've done. Welcome, everyone, to the science diplomacy session. We're hoping to get you to think in a new way today about your role in an international community of research. And I'd like to thank my nano project, Sabina, and my coordinator and work package leader at LETAT, who've supported me in this organization, but also another project in another cluster, a project called Inside, which is inventing a shared science diplomacy for Europe, coordinated at the Sorbonne here in Paris. And I am so happy that this cluster membership has let me meet these wonderful science diplomats like Lorenzo, who'll be speaking, or Guillermo. I'm a social psychologist, and I've been working for 10 years in the nano safety cluster in different projects, NanoFate, NanoPhase, coordinated by Klaus Svensson from CEH in Wallingford in the UK. And my work there has been what we call translational work. That is to say, helping to translate results in environmental modeling, nano-ecotoxicological results, translate them to help them get across various borders, disciplinary borders, stakeholder group borders. And I have to say that my colleagues in NanoFate and NanoPhase have been incredibly good and very inspiring at this kind of border crossing work. The nano safety cluster, one of the very interesting and intriguing things for me during the time that I've worked with the colleagues is the idea of these communities of research and also specific missions in which nanoscientists, nano safety scientists have been recruited essentially by the European Commission to go on missions to, for example, Mexico or Iran, to build up scientific exchange and understanding. And now I see on our wonderful new nanosafety cluster site that Tassos has created that there's a real formalization of this story in terms of EU nanosafety delegations. Now, this language here, which I've abstracted from this page in the nanosafety cluster website, is a really interesting page for me now that I've learned something about science diplomacy. We see that the NSC sees itself as really cooperating with the European Union to develop and sustain links of all kinds, not just scientific links, but using scientific cooperation as a vehicle to develop and sustain different kinds of links. And one of the main overarching goals would be to raise awareness amongst the scientific community in third countries on EU values, visions, and priorities. And this page also mentions specific entities within the European Union. The European External Action Service, which is Europe's foreign ministry, if you will, and the European Commission, which we all know, to build relevant, ambitious, and genuine relations with third countries. So I think that today is a good time to talk with practitioners and learn about how people have become involved in what is perhaps a little bit more than your typical scientific cooperation. I'd like us to reflect today, and the practitioners and researchers who are joining us will help us think today about what does it mean to step out of a pure scientist role, if such exists, into some kind of international relations, some kind of translational role also, trying to communicate values and perhaps change the way people and political structures in other countries are dealing with our own context. Stella, can you jump down? If you want to learn more about science diplomacy, my wonderful sister project within the European Science Diplomacy Cluster, S4D4C, has made a great video. They are running a wonderful online course that Lorenzo will tell you about in a minute. And inside my own project, we'll do our second edition of a science diplomacy school next June. And this, I'm showing here the sort of brochure, which is on the Sabina site under news. Let's have the last slide so that we can go immediately now to an initiation to science diplomacy by Lorenzo Melchior. Go for it, Lorenzo. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you, NanoSafe 2020. Thank you all attendees for this initiation to science diplomacy or for this workshop on science diplomacy. I've got the hard task to introduce you what science diplomacy is in just under 15 minutes. So I'll do my best to just show you certain ideas to give you an overview. My name is Lorenzo Melchior, and I work at the Spanish Foundation for Science and Technology as an EU Science Advice and Diplomacy Officer, directly involved in the project S4D4C. Next slide, Stella. We live in a world that is facing global challenges: climate change, aging, global health, sustainable cities, migration, pandemic, also income inequality, or the battle of two superpowers, such as the United States of China, or the crisis of democracy. Next slide. And we are living in a moment where COVID-19 is such a global challenge. It has taken shape, and we have a virus being spread all across the world and putting our welfare states at risk, not only on the health system, but also on the economic system. We are seeing that science is taking a predominant role in everything, but putting policy making in place with science advice we can see that it also has its frictions worldwide. And lastly, the development of a vaccine is an exercise that goes beyond cooperation to the realm of competition between countries or between big pharma to produce such a vaccine. This is a complex topic, COVID-19, with many different angles. Next slide, Stella. So, for the last 40 years, globalization and interdependence, and especially digital revolution, has greatly affected science and diplomacy in many different ways. But if we are to tackle global challenges, we need to invest in science and technology, because most of those global challenges I explained before have a scientific or technological solution, but they require the agreement of many different countries to put in place policies that will tackle those global challenges using those scientific and technical solutions. So we require an exercise of science diplomacy. Next slide. And this is important because science, technology, and innovation are getting increasingly important or key in international affairs. Science and diplomacy are talking to each other now more than ever, because science is a source of economic development and competitiveness, because scientific cooperation drives international cooperation, but also because the impact of big tech, global cities, and tech clusters are changing the way diplomacy was traditionally undertaken by nation states to different governance levels or different actors beyond the state actor. Next slide. But science has been used, not now, but before, as an instrument of soft power. We can witness different science and technology agreements between countries that were in principle enemies or not allies, like the US and the United States and the communist Russia. Also, the establishment of large scientific infrastructures here in Europe with CERN, but also in the Middle East with Sesame, and many different big endeavors like space exploration. Next slide. But we need to tackle one issue. Science and diplomacy are two different worlds with two different kinds of professionals. Scientists and diplomats belong to two different worlds. They do have different interests, norms, attitude. So how we combine them? Daryl Copeland says scientists and diplomats are two strange bedfellows. Next slide. So this is why we, like in 2010, the world started putting a lot of attention on science diplomacy. And for you to understand, there is not a single definition of science diplomacy or a single understanding of science diplomacy. Different actors understand this word in different ways. You may find some useful definitions in this seminal paper in the Royal Society and the AAAS, or another paper by Tim Flink and Nicholas Ruffin. But next slide. A couple of years ago, the Madrid Declaration on Science Diplomacy was released as part of our export diplomacy project, and in there we approached science diplomacy with a very simple definition. Science diplomacy understood as a series of practices that are at the intersection of science, technology, innovation, with foreign policy and diplomacy. Everything that has to do with bringing together all these complex topics. Next slide. The different conceptual approaches that were put forward by the seminal policy paper in 2010 are these ones. Like science in diplomacy, putting scientific knowledge in diplomacy agreements or in diplomacy negotiations. Like the scientific advice that is present every year with the Climate Change Summit is one example. Another approach is diplomacy for science, is putting in contact different countries together to put money and resources and talent for some mission or some approach that no one country can do it by itself, because it's too expensive, like space exploration or many other different projects. It involves putting many countries together to do this scientific endeavor. And the last, science for diplomacy, is an approach in which where you have two countries that don't cooperate with each other because they are enemies or they don't have a nice relationship, you may start putting in place scientific collaborations as a way for improving diplomatic relationships between countries. We saw this especially with the Obama administration of the United States and Cuba, for instance, in regards to forecast of weather, because a hurricane or a tornado that arises in the Caribbean will affect Cuba and the United States regardless of their economic or political systems. Next slide. One important issue in science diplomacy is that the stakeholders that are involved. Traditionally, we are talking in diplomacy about governmental stakeholders and nation states, but they are not the only players in science diplomacy. We have intergovernmental and supranational bodies, like for instance the United Nations, but we also have the research and academic sector. Universities, large research centers, and other type of research-related institutions are getting a predominant role in international affairs. Private sector, with multinationals and SMEs, are also a growing key actor in diplomacy in general. And lastly, organized civil society like national or transnational NGOs, but also private charities and patrons and activists are an increasing player in everything related to diplomacy and also with science diplomacy. Next slide. But okay, national networks and national country or state nation states are a predominant player. And certain countries deploy strategies to allocate or employ scientists at their embassies abroad. They would be like the science delegates to represent their national science and technology systems abroad in order to build up scientific collaborations or also to drive competitiveness of their national country. The UK Science and Innovation Network, for instance, has a network of 110 delegates abroad, whereas the Swissnet network employs around 70 people to work in 30 different countries. Next slide. And also we can discuss about regional approaches. There are areas like the Arctic or the Antarctic or the Mediterranean or the Middle East that they are areas that transcend borders, and they are not just a matter of one single country, but there are many that are involved. How do we liaise with scientific topics of interest in those regional approaches? How these countries cooperate with each other or compete with each other under these frameworks? For instance, PRIMA is a funding framework to develop research projects related to water and energy sustainability and food security in the Mediterranean area, bringing together countries from the northern Mediterranean and the southern Mediterranean, building capacities in both sides and building collaborative projects. The mission in the Antarctica is a nice one as well. How a space that it doesn't belong to any particular country, and it's a very hazard place to undertake research. How all these countries got together to actually explore this place and collaborate. Next slide. And global approaches. Well, we have a very good successful example in science diplomacy that is usually mentioned, and it's the fact of the ozone hole and how it got fixed with the effort from the scientific community, providing evidence that the ozone layer was getting extinguished in certain parts, and how this triggered a very aggressive negotiation at the level of the United Nations for all countries to accept certain regulations, and now the ozone hole is much better than before. Lastly, in the United Nations, in 2015, the COP agreement in Paris was reached. And also all the agenda of the 17 SDGs is another success story of how science diplomacy can be framed to tackle global challenges. Next slide. So, understood what is science diplomacy, let's understand who are the people who do science diplomacy, or who are these science diplomats. In a paper that I had the pleasure to publish recently in the Hague Journal of Diplomacy, I elaborated this definition, or this wide definition, meaning that science diplomats would be all those professionals, be they scientists or diplomats, who work to place STI affairs as an important dimension within international relations and the international policy system. Of course, we can have scientists who they do research, and their mandate is to do research, and from time to time they may engage in diplomatic negotiations as scientific advisors. Those would be the diplomat scientists. Or we could have diplomats at embassies who have the portfolio of science, technology, and innovation. Those would be the scientist diplomat. But before, or besides these two very strict professionals, we can have in the middle additional profiles of mediators or knowledge brokers, people with a scientific background that aren't undertaking research anymore, but they are working in international organizations or in governmental departments to facilitate the collaboration and the connectivity between diplomats and scientists. Next slide. These science diplomats, regardless whether they are scientists or diplomats, they need to have a set of boundary spanning skills. They need to understand the world of science and the world of diplomacy and build bridges between the two of them. That's why they need to have cultural dexterity, a lot of networking and interpersonal skills, communication skills, storytelling, and many other traits that are shown in this slide. Next slide, please. In the paper that I mentioned before, in the Hague Journal of Diplomacy, we elaborated a taxonomy of different science diplomat profiles. Some of them will be institutionalized positions, like people working at embassies, national representation abroad, international or intergovernmental departments, or even in national ministries. They would have like the specific portfolio of representing science diplomacy. But we can also have non-institutionalized positions in a kind of a conceptual stretch definition of science diplomacy to refer to all those policy officers, even researchers who work not in state actors, but in other sectors, and who from time to time, sporadically, may affect international relations and international affairs. Next slide. However, there are certain challenges and recommendations. There is not a clear career path in science diplomacy. There is the requirement of additional training and experience. Science is just one piece in the global puzzle of international affairs, and you need to nurture your communication and networking skills. Last slide is just to recommend you that this S44C European Science Diplomacy online course delves on many of the topics that I introduced in this 15 minutes talk. It's a free online course that you can take at your own pace, and more than 5,000 people are already taking this course. Next slide. Just to simplify that, science diplomacy involves scientific advice, international diplomacy, science cooperation, and many different actors that may work at government, but also at non-governmental stakeholders. The last slide only gives away my contact details. I'm sorry for the 2 minutes late.
Great job, Florenza. Thank you so much. People, I hope that has kind of intrigued you and gotten your curiosity. Maybe you've already started thinking about how you yourself, as a scientist, place yourself in regard to addressing global challenges. You're not just working in your lab, you're trying to contribute to well-being and to planetary future, shall we say. Perhaps when you use scientific equipment, large equipment in another country, you'll understand now, if it wasn't sort of one of the main things you thought of before, you'll understand that that's a regional or global level approach to science cooperation, which may have various rationales behind it. But how about the national approach? First of all, I should say that Lorenzo himself spent a long time in London doing science diplomacy and developing it. And we're going to hear now from Guillermo Orts, who also is a nanoscientist. Lorenzo is not. Guillermo will tell us about how a nanoscientist found himself in diplomatic service and what that has meant. I'd just like to mention before Guillermo starts that you can, we're going to have breakout groups, of course, so that you can discuss more deeply with our speakers. And meanwhile, we'll have a few minutes for questions after Guillermo's talk, so you could put a few questions into the chat. Guillermo, I see a message from you. You cannot hear. Is that all right now?
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
I hear. Yes, I hear.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead now, Guillermo. Go ahead.
Because in communication, we said the first mistake in communication is to assume that communication has taken place. So I apologize. I could not hear the introduction by you, Claire. But if I'm right, you can hear me. So
we can hear you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So, and thank you for introduction and invitation. And first of all, I would like to say hello not only to Claire, but to everyone here. I can see your names: Adrien, Antonio, Claire, Agnes, Cristina, Clarissa, Christophe, another Cristina, Hilaria, Konstantinos, Caxo, Nimke, Paul, Steffi, Sean, Tassos, and Jarkin. This is wonderful. I can see your names because this is important that you know to whom are you speaking to. So my name is Guillermo Ort-Gils, and I'm a scientist by training, but I had some experience in my career, and I would like to share with you my story, my personal story. And so the title of the talk is Nanoscientist in Diplomatic Service. But I decided to change the title because I like to change titles. And if you go to the next slide, please. Yeah, the title could also be How I Got Here and What I Learned on the Way. And this is more accurate, maybe, according to my story. And the story is as it follows. If you go to the next slide, please. So this is my mom, and this is my dad. My dad looking through the microscope, and my mom having some fun at the lab. So I come from a family of chemists, but to be honest, I never had the feeling that was the only opportunity in life. Actually, when I was a child, my dad and my mom already quit doing science. So I knew my father and my mother, not as a scientist, but doing other jobs. And I found these pictures many years afterwards. And it helps me to illustrate that science is an important part of life, but it's not the only part of life. And I remember I went with my father to look for some paintings, some very old paintings. You can see me on the wall here looking for old paintings in Spain. You know, we have these caves and these nice places, you know? Very, very old. And when I was a child, I didn't see my dad with a lab coat or my mom, but they told me nicely that science was an important part of life, but not the only one. So if we go to the next slide, please. So many years after these pictures, by the way, the pictures in black and white were taken in Barcelona in 1955, I think. Okay, and many years later, it was me. This is me and my colleagues at the Max Planck Society, where I was working for several years. Actually, all my scientific career was in Germany, where I did my PhD in physical chemistry, and then I was working on nano and also nanotoxicology at the Federal Institute for Material Research, and then at the Max Planck Society. And why I'm showing you this? Because I think many of you are scientists, probably most of you. So I know quite well how do you feel and how do you think maybe, and the experience to be in a lab and to work and doing experiments and writing papers and all this stuff, which is very nice, and is a very nice part of, or it was a very nice part of my life. But if we go to the next slide, yes, this is also me, and it was more or less at the same year as the previous picture. But here I started something new. I started doing things outside the lab. Actually, I started doing communication activities, and it was writing in blogs, writing for a journal about science and nano and so on. And at that time, I also started working as a head of communications of a very special, let's say, institution, which it was called SERFA. It was an association of scientists. And I'm so thankful to this association. I'm so thankful to SERFA because they transmit me, they teach me the need and the importance to see science also like this, to see science in color, to see science as an important part of life, and to see science also outside the lab. So since this year's at the Max Planck Society, working with very, very good scientists, and also combining this with my part-time job, let's say, at this Association of Scientists, working in communication, I really develop a love or a sense for aesthetic and also a couple of things I will tell you later, maybe the next slide. So science, arts, communication. I had all those ingredients in my life, but in 2015, I read about an opportunity, and the opportunity was to join an embassy in Berlin, and to work in an embassy in Berlin. And I thought at the beginning, okay, it sounds interesting. It sounds really to go out of the box, and they need a scientist or someone who knows very well science and who knows very well Germany. And at that time, I was living already for, I think, 12 years in Germany, and I knew the country very well and the science system. And they offered me a position at the Embassy of Spain in Germany. And I was thinking a little bit about this, and at the end, I made my research and in internet, and also I visit Max Planck Center for the History of Science, and I found this guy, the story of this guy. And this is apparently the first science diplomat. And yeah, it was inspiring for me because you see this guy is sitting close to a microscope in the same way my father did, in the same way my mother did, and in the same way I spent many years working with microscopes, with electron microscopes. So I thought, okay, it's interesting. If this guy was doing this, and it was the first science diplomat, it was in 1898. 1898. It was the US Embassy in Berlin. So I got inspired by this guy, and I said to myself, okay, let's give a chance, let's try, why not? So I started working in an embassy. And in the next slides, I'm going to try to tell you my experience with this. So very shortly, I have few slides and a couple of messages. One of the important messages is this one. Science diplomacy is about relations. Science is also about relations. Every activity is about relations at the end, but diplomacy and science diplomacy too is about relations. So I attend so many events, conferences. I invite people to the embassy. I went to other embassies. I'm here with this guy on the left, is the president of the Max Planck Society. And right, on the right, you can see the president of the Nobel Foundation. And in the middle, you can see the only Spanish astronaut, who is now Minister of Science and Innovation in Spain. And on the right down, you can see the president of the European Research Council. And of course, I met these people and many other interesting people, sometimes not famous, but so interesting. And so I learned relations are very, very, very important. Okay, you can be the best scientist, you can be the best professional in your field, but if you don't work properly in your relations, you are missing something. And this is the first thing I learned. Okay, if we can please, Stella, go to the next slide. So the second thing I learned after some months was to try to translate these relations, these events, this, let's say, diplomatic environment with something you can touch, with something you can give value or can give value to someone. And I think this is the point. Okay, I think many people have a negative concept of diplomacy, and sometimes partially they are right, because if you are only doing relations all the time and you don't have a concrete goal, then it's only good for you. It's only good maybe for your embassy. It's maybe good for a little bit for your country, but you have to add value. And with science diplomacy, you can add value, create something. Okay, so at that time I learned, after so many meetings and events and meeting nice people, that it's important to, in science diplomacy, try to find some needs, identify needs, and then try to contribute to the solutions. Okay, and also to promote synergies, because sometimes it's not an issue of what you can do or what you know, but to put person A and person B in contact with a concrete goal. You can see here a group of people on the left side down, and there were doctors working in Germany and doctors working in Barcelona, and they had the same goal, but they never met. So I tried to arrange an event, and we really did it. And then they start working on CAR-T technology, CAR-T therapies for cancer or against cancer. Okay, and the last one is create value, and value can be in training people, in relations, training people, let's say, education. I visit many schools, I visit high schools, and I spent 3 years in an embassy, and I make a list after the 3 years, and we promote with this position 52 actions, and I always try that the actions had some value. Okay, not to stand only at the relations level, but try to focus these relations, trying to create some value. So next slide, please. I don't know how much time do I know. Can please anyone write here how many minutes do I have in the chat?
4 minutes. 4 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Claire. So I have 4 minutes. It's more than enough. So after that, after my 3 years at the embassy, and also during this time, I further developed my skills as a communicator, and I was writing for magazines. I was working for a TV show. I was working doing radio, podcasts, every kind of communication form. And that was a very good training for me. And now comes the end of the story. So from science to diplomacy, international relations, communication. So if you go, please, Stella, to the next slide. This is the place I am. This is the place I wanted to be. And luckily, I achieved to come here. I achieved to come to IBEC. This is the Institute for Bioengineering of Catalonia. And we have a slogan. And the slogan is Bioengineering Solutions for Health. Okay? And I'm acting here as a head of communications and public relations. So why I decided to come to IBEC? First, because it's Barcelona. It was my hometown. It's my hometown. And because I can combine at IBEC, at this position, all the things I love. And I learn science, solutions, communication, international relations, and health. So for me, science diplomacy was a part of my life, and I think it has intrinsic and extrinsic values you can explode, you can use, and it is good, as Lorenzo said, to trade some training maybe with this offer he's making to you, and I encourage to also take part of the course and to know more about science diplomacy. And okay, I hope you enjoy the story, and if you have questions, please. This is me again, and this is my email. If you want to write me or to ask me directly now, it's my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Guillermo. I see that we have a question from Janice, who is part of our Warsaw Science Diplomacy School. We have another one from Tassos. Oh, no, that's the old one from the last session. You don't have to answer this one, Guillermo. Let me say also to all of the participants that I think that Lorenzo would be happy to reply to questions as well. We have about 10 minutes for this. Guillermo, what's your response to Janice?
Let's say my background, my training as a scientist, I would say, not only at Nano, okay, it brought me opened me so many windows, so many opportunities, because I think Lorenzo put it on the slide very nicely, okay? You are analytical, think-oriented, you are oriented to understand complex things, you have your tools. As a scientist, you have your tools, and you have your tools with you. And specifically, to be a nanoscientist. Well, we organize many events about nanotechnology. For instance, we brought the falling walls competition from Berlin to Barcelona. And we organized this pitch competition in Barcelona. And people from ICFO, from other institutes, applied for the pitch. And the people who were winning this competition, they got a very nice trip, everything paid to Berlin, to take part in the international competition of falling wall. Okay, and this is an example, and they came into the news, and the guy who won, it was a guy from Turkey working in Barcelona. It was good for the Spanish institution, it was good for the scientists, it was good for the embassy, it was good for falling walls. So being a nanoscientist helped me in such kind of things, and always trying to look for the win-win or nano-win, if you like.
Yeah, I'd like to comment that maybe our participants can be thinking about these great synergies that you've spoken of, Guillermo, that you've been able to trigger. And I'm wondering about your speech was so personal, and I want to encourage our participants also to take a really personal look inside and think about the things that make you love to be a scientist, and think about the things that make you very good at being a scientist. You know, this analytical thought, or this intellectual stamina, or this ability to see both the details and a huge picture, this ability to collaborate, and think about whether you also like to make not only scientific understanding and solutions to scientific problems happen. Do you also like to make relationships happen? Do you also like to make synergies happen? Do you like to see really big things coming together because of your effort? So that, I think, is part of what we're trying to touch on in this science diplomacy training today. How about some more questions? I think that there are some more that are being typed up, and maybe Lorenzo, while we wait, you can just make a comment.
Yeah. In order to answer to Janice, Guillermo has already said a lot, but we wouldn't like you to go back to your research bench thinking that we are asking you to leave and to quit academia, okay? We believe that the scientist of the 21st or even the 22nd century must be a scientist who undertakes very excellent research, but understand that their research should have an impact or a policy impact in society. So as a nanotechnologist or a nanoscientist, part of your research surely there are people discussing at the European Union level or at the United Nations level about the limits of your research or the impact of your research or etc. You should make aware, you should be aware that those conversations are ongoing. And if they aren't ongoing, you should foster those discussions, okay? But in that role, you are still a researcher. There are other roles in which, for instance, the one that Guillermo and I had the pleasure to perform in the embassies of Spain abroad, where you stop being an expert, being a nanoscientist, to become a specialist of almost everything. You need to understand how research is undertaken. You will not be talking about nanoscience in particular. From time to time, you will be sitting in a table talking about climate change or health, and you know nothing about that. But you are familiar, you are a PhD, and you are familiar with how research is conducted. So you know where to find the right experts that you will invite or that you will give a phone call to get familiarized with those topics. That's why a PhD in any of these scientific fields is welcomed to perform in the science diplomacy field.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and Lorenzo is addressing himself to the majority in our audience who are of scientific background or activities today. But we also have in our audience people from other disciplines who are coming at this from the diplomatic side, and you'll be able to chat with them in the breakout groups. And those are cases when science attachés who may have training in history or English or economics suddenly have to become great experts of how to bring people together to find scientific solutions in an international relations setting. Okay, we have a question from Neil Hunt now. Guillermo.
Good question. Yeah. Right now, well, I'm going to refer in 30 seconds what I was doing during my time at the embassy and now, maybe. When you come out of a pure academic institution, it can happen many times that you start interacting with different kind of people. And many times these people can be from industry, for instance, okay? And to be in touch with diplomats is more common when you work in an embassy. But a couple of weeks ago, we have the opportunity to present IBEC or Institute during a science diplomacy breakfast, okay, in Brussels. Well, and now everything is virtual, but we were more or less in Brussels too. And yeah, you have to use another approach. So every professional field has a different language, and they have more than the language are the interests. So you need to know what's the interest of the people you are talking to. Okay, and this is the most important thing. And the second thing is you have to be really confident and clear what's your message. Okay, and if you are able to transmit your message, you maybe will achieve your goal. And it's independently if it's industry or our diplomats. But you have to take into consideration that diplomats probably they are less risk oriented, as Lorenzo mentioned. So they want probably to just build up relations. If you go to industry, they want to sign contracts and to make money. And yeah, of course, once you come out of an pure academic institution, or even in an academic institution, you also will do probably, Neil, you will start interacting with these stakeholders and people, and yeah, it makes fun too.
Yeah, Neil and everybody, our practitioners here in this part of our workshop had very institutionalized roles. As Lorenzo pointed out, obviously science diplomats are not only the people who are in the embassies. And so this question of different language, different interests, different values. It's part of what Agnieszka has put into her question. I think, Stella, you're going to have to scroll down a little bit for us. And I also want to mention that it will be specifically addressed in our panel in a few minutes by Rasmus Bertelsen, and probably in the breakout that Guillermo and Rasmus will share. So, I guess that we can each scroll down ourselves to see the end of Agnieszka's question. Communication becomes challenging without a shared ground of values. What would you advise to meet such challenges using science diplomacy? In just a minute.
Okay. I think, Agnes, you can find the answer by yourself, and I can tell you about my experience. But if you are a scientist and you speak to your mother or grandmother, probably you will face some of the similar challenges you face when you as a scientist speak to a diplomat. Why? Because these people are not scientists, okay? So if you are a science diplomat, of course, you will face challenges. The point is to build up relationships. You need to find the common values, and you make it very clear in your question, and you make it very well. So you have to find the shared values and interests, okay? And if you are able to do that, you can create a relationship, and you can really achieve a win-win. And it's not easy, but you have to be, you have to prepare your meeting, to know who is this person, what the interests, what the values. Maybe a diplomat knows nothing about science, but maybe the son or the daughter has a disease, or maybe has interest for astrophysics or the stars or whatever. You have to find a common interest or value or something in common, and then build up the relationship. Before that, you have to speak and listen a lot.
Yeah, to elaborate on this, Guillermo and I have been lucky because, I mean, we were deployed to the Spanish embassies in Berlin and in London. So basically, Western values, Western culture, a different situation would have been if we had been deployed, I'm not sure, to Russia, Iran, or any other country who doesn't or have the same Western values and so forth. And in that regard, I mean, diplomacy skills are mandatory, and we would have been required to operate next to a diplomat 24/7 because they are the ones fully trained.
Because we have the technical problem, I cannot hear Lorenzo. I guess Lorenzo is answering the question, or commenting on this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Guillermo, we hear you.
So basically, we were lucky because we were deployed to these countries. But in other countries with more sensitive issues about political affairs, we would have required a lot of political support from diplomats. Having said that, I can rely on my experience being in the UK and before and after the Brexit referendum. And okay, the Brexit referendum had a result I wasn't in favor of, and perhaps my country wasn't either, but we had to find a common place because we had to respect the democratic decision undertaken by the UK. So before Brexit or after the referendum, we changed dramatically the type of activities that we undertook, and we actually saw a different willingness or a different, I mean, it was like the topic was no longer building up collaborations, but it was how are we going to get out of this situation and how we can ensure bridges of collaboration after Brexit for the UK to keep continuing collaborating with the European Union or with Spain. And also, what are the interests of Spanish scientists working in the UK? How from the Spanish embassy we could, I don't know, support the Spanish citizens, regardless of whether they were scientists or not, in all this process of Brexit. But as I said, this is a very sensitive scenario where you need to understand that scientific interests are not the only ones at stake. And you need to liaise with political interest a lot.
Yes, and that's one reason why I was very eager to invite Rasmus Bertelsen here. At our Warsaw Science Diplomacy School, Rasmus organized an entire day on risks, safety, and security for the science diplomat, because there are risks at many levels, both for the national objectives and sometimes also for the individual. Being pressed into an unfamiliar context with perhaps many more underlying currents of interests and objectives than are obvious on the surface. Thank you, Tassos, for your comment about respecting different views. It joins what Guillermo said about having to listen. Neil, you have asked a very, very, very wide open question, which we shall not answer right now. And I just want to point you to the policy briefs which have been developed by S4D4C and which will be soon coming out from Inside. You can also go to the Inside website and listen to the webinars that we organized on many dimensions of science diplomatic response to the COVID crisis. Let us go on now. Stella, if you want to give me my slide pack number 2. Thank you. Thanks very much, Guillermo and Lorenzo. We'll come back to you in the breakouts. And Stella has several things to do, both to give me my slide pack number 2 and also to make Adrienne, Antonino, and Rasmus into potential presenters. We'll be going soon to Adrienne Sips from RIVM in Holland, whose everyday job is about making a link between nanoscientists and regulators. And she's also had some of these larger governmental dimension missions. I've asked a lot of impossible things of my friends and speakers, Adrienne and then Antonino Puglisi, who will tell us more about his own unexpected journey as a scientist crossing borders. I've asked each of them to speak for just 5 minutes in a personal way, once again, about the particular pathways they've taken. And then I'll be asking Rasmus Bertelsen from Inside to step back and give us a political science point of view. And Rasmus, I'll say that we were wondering, shall we get into the politically incorrect? Shall we get into the darker side? I'm thinking that Guillermo and the questions and the discussion we've just had have been very clear about the issues of finding common ground in interests. I would say that you can be a little bit less politically correct than we were sort of planning, if needed, when you make your 10-minute talk. So I'd like to give the floor now to Adrienne. Stella, if you can fire up her slides.
So Adrienne has not supplied us any slides.
Oh, yes, she has. Oh, my, yes. Yeah. Yes, I sent them, a week ago, 10 days ago. Shall I bring them up in my my panel then?
If you can upload them, yes, I have not received them. Sorry about this.
Okay, sorry. Let's.
On the other hand, I have Antonino's slides.
Mm-hmm.
Should I put Antonino's slides?
I'm going to try to make my screen work now. If I can remember what you've said about how to make my screen work. I take screen sharing.
Mm-hmm.
I open in browser.
Yeah.
An application window. And this one I'll share. And I hope that this is good for Adrienne. Please, Adrienne, just tell me if you can see this and tell me when I should go from slide to slide, please.
Yes, I can see them, and I hope you all can see and hear me. Thank you. I want to say something from the perspective of innovation and safety, and that in relation to science diplomacy. I must say that science diplomacy wasn't a familiar wording for me before you invited me, Claire, for this session. But it also triggered me very much to know more about it. So I think that is the good thing about these gatherings and these meetings, just to raise awareness for these developments. May I have the next slides, please? And you can press the button, I think, 3 times, and then we have all the text that is on the... Yes, thank you. What I notice is, and most of you, I think, are already knowing me from other nano safety projects, and my goal is always to connect to what is going on in innovation and how can we connect from the safety world to this innovation world. And what is, from my perspective, really changing in the forthcoming years is that now these societal goals, these societal challenges, like Lorenzo already mentioned from the SDGs, but also the very clear European ambitions to support this with all kinds of strategies, like the chemical strategy, or strategies concerning plastic pollution or energy transition, digitalization, well, name it. Put even more pressure to that. And also, of course, on top of that, we also have the COVID crisis, which asks for resilience and preparedness. And, you know, it's all nice wordings and we all work very hard, but what can we do to it? And is it something we can do alone as a nano safety cluster, for example? What you also see is that it's not only a policy goal, but there's also a societal demand behind it. Not, let's say, to do a little bit of our utmost best, but even more to that, because we really have to achieve goals by 2030 or by 2050. So there's a really sense of urgency to that. And that poses regulators, well, to some challenges, I would say. Challenges because innovation is stimulated so fiercely that it's quite difficult to keep pace with that. May I have the next slide, please?
Oh, yeah, sorry, here's industry.
They're also there. And I think when you're working in this environment of RRI or a nano safety cluster, or know what's going on already in Europe or in other international areas dealing with nano safety, then you think, well, the world is big enough and it's already very nice how we can handle this together. But I think we all are aware now that there are these demands from society and that there are things going on in technology development and industry trying to grab this and putting this into products. And I think even also what I noticed from the nano safety cluster is that it's, yeah, let's say, difficult enough to organize everything in our own bubble, but we have to deal with policymakers, with regulators, with scientists, with industry, with many stakeholders, but so have these people in the other bubbles, like in society, the societal organizations, or the people who are working in technology development. And I think we all need from each bubbles those ambassadors or those people who try to make the connection. And you can do that on a scientific level, and I think, well, many of us already do that, but it's of course also a matter on, well, what is pushed, for example, in technology. If we push, for example, battery technology, that might mean that also new materials, like especially nanomaterials, are becoming in focus. Society says, okay, that's great, because then we can have these electrical vehicles, or we can use less fossil fuels. But in the meantime, we also have to catch up with that, because when these nanomaterials are, for example, carbon nanotubes, which are, well, under discussion, then I think it's at least important to inform these others, okay, this is a nice route, but let's do this together, because, you know, we have to do this in balance. And I think for that reason, it's important that perhaps we all from each bubble have to act a little bit as a diplomat from our own perspectives, but from the sense for example, Lorenzo addressed, I think that needs indeed more this more, I would call it formal science diplomacy aspect, and that is something which needs some further thoughts also, I think, for the nano safety cluster. And may I have the last slide? I read the paper of Lorenzo, which he referred to already, and then I thought, okay, you mentioned to me, Claire, for you are a science diplomat, although you're not aware of it, and I tried to position myself in the table on the left side, and I thought, well, it's a bit in the middle, like always. You're not fitting really in one of the typical parts of this table. On the other hand, I think I've tried to sum up on the right-hand side, well, some of the things I do, but I think in essence what I do is I try to express what my colleagues within our IVM or within the safety cluster do in respect to nano safety, and I try to translate that and bring that to the innovation community and try to form these bridges. Whether that makes me a science diplomat or not, that is, I think, is up to others. But yeah, I think it is something which is feasible for everybody, and we should do more than before in the forthcoming years, because we need to address this complexity that is coming ahead by doing these kind of activities. So thank you.
Great. Okay, thanks. Stella, how do I stop sharing my screen? Is that fine now? Right. Thank you so much. Thanks, Stella. And thank you, Stella. You've been just great getting dozens of different slides from so many presenters. Thanks for making everything work today. Adrienne, I think it's really interesting and important that you've made a direct link now between science diplomacy, which might be something new that we're trying to raise awareness of and understand today together, and something that all of us are really asked to deal with, and that is RRI, responsible research and innovation. So I think that that's really a way forward, I would say, in the thinking that my colleagues and I can do after this workshop. And we want to write up a blog article for our EU science diplomacy site. And I think that that's definitely one of the angles we should look into carefully. Thanks, Adrienne. So let's pass the floor now over to Nino, who's going to tell about his unexpected journey. Has Nino become a presenter, Stella?
So, Antonino,
yes.
You now need to unmute your mic. Sorry, you now need to unmute your microphone.
Yeah. All right.
Yes.
Can you see and hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So, very good afternoon, everyone. My name is Antonio Puglisi, and I'm an Italian research scientist, currently based in Austria. Yeah, as Claire mentioned today, I'd like to share with you my ordinary, if you want, but yet unexpected journey, which is seen me transition from academia to industry and back to university across 4 different countries. From my native Sicily, where I got my education in chemistry, master's and PhD, I moved to the UK, where I did a couple of postdocs, and eventually was hired as a senior scientist in a private company working on innovative technology for DNA sequencing. I then decided to make a comeback to university on a Marie Curie action in Istanbul, Turkey, and eventually came back to Europe a couple of months ago, and I'm currently based at Bochum University in Vienna. I initially set off my journey studying cyclodextrins. I'm pretty sure some of you might be familiar with in the nanoscience realm. They are donut-shaped oligosaccharides, sugary compounds with a range of different very interesting applications. And that led me to the hiring into nanotechnology company in deploying cyclohexane for DNA sequencing. That was a very interesting experience professionally, and that led to the commercialization of handheld DNA sequencing device, which is also currently being used for detecting corona. I eventually decided to make a comeback to university, motivated by the fact that cyclohexanes, which I'd become a little bit of an expert in, seemed to be a promising therapeutic approach in treating a very severe rare genetic disorder called Niemann-Pick disease type C. In NPC, there is an overaccumulation of cholesterol into the brain, and I thought to use that expertise that I'd developed in trying to give a contribution to solve the problem. And in order to do that, I applied for an individual fellowship in Marie Curie and decided to choose a host institution in Istanbul, Turkey, with a specific skills in advanced polymer chemistry. That gave me not only the possibility to access to an individual and independent grant, but also to get exposed to the wider Marie Curie Alumni Association, which was a great opportunity for me to strengthen that link, which I've always felt passionate about, between society and science. In particular, during the years in Turkey as a Marie Curie alumnum, I teamed up with a Turkish professor in setting up the Turkish chapter of the Marie Curie Alumni Association. That was a great opportunity because it enabled me to network and get to know a lot of Turkish researchers and professors. And I was very humbled by the fact that when at the time of the establishment of the chapter, they asked me to become the co-chair of the Turkish association, although at the time I was the only non-Turkish member of the Turkish association, which was quite a humbling and beautiful experience. I got to know quite a lot of the culture. I ended up staying 4 years in Turkey. I learned quite a bit of Turkish as well, to the point I can express myself. But what I think I've learned most importantly is from my own personal experience, that once you immerse completely into a culture to that degree, it becomes really impossible to accept any stereotypes or sweeping generalizations about the way we look to a culture which is so foreign, so different to ours. Generally, the way we look from the West, we look at the East or the Islamic world, or the way we look from Southern Europe to Northern Europe and vice versa. So my take-home message, I'm sure we can develop that into the breakout rooms now, is that scientists are called more and more not only to use science as a great power really for culture, but also to make space for scientists to learn other languages, in the sense of not only learn the language of science, which is very important, but also the language of policy and the language of other cultures, so that we can fully deploy that the science to the benefit of society. So I'll end here my statement, and I look forward to having a wider discussion later.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Antonino. And I should mention that Antonino is someone who has crossed borders in far beyond typical science questions. Look up Antonino online and you'll find some really fascinating ecological engagements. Let's go to Rasmus now. Rasmus, you have the floor for about 8-9 minutes. Thank you.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Can you see and hear me?
Yes, I do, anyway.
Good. I expect that somebody will protest if Claire is the only one hearing or seeing me. Thank you very much for the invitation to be here this afternoon. It's always very, very inspiring to listen to Lorenzo and my other colleagues you've listened to. And I'm very happy to have the opportunity to follow up on what they have been saying. So I am a professor of international relations. International relations is a subfield of political science, which is of course one of the social sciences. And social sciences, political sciences, they deal very much with intergroup relations in society. And these intergroup relations, they can often be very, very competitive, very, very conflictual. So I suspect that my perspective on science diplomacy and many of the things that we've been talking about today, my colleagues have talked a good deal about collaboration and building bridges between societies, that the social science, the political science perspective can be quite conflictual and quite competitive. And I realize, listening to these interdisciplinary discussions, how much social science is often about understanding intergroup conflicts and perhaps contributing to regulate those intergroup conflicts. And that's also a function of science diplomacy. So to give some remarks on values and interests across countries, cultures, disciplines, and sectors. So please move to the next slide. And perhaps you can, I see all the slides in the right panel. It takes a bit of space. I don't know if that's the case for others. A brief introduction to myself. We've heard very, very interesting stories of personal journeys, intellectual journeys, international journeys. I'm a Danish national born in 1975 in Denmark. I grew up in Iceland. And then, as you can see, I've had the opportunity to study and work different places in Europe, in the United States, and in Japan before my current position as Professor of Northern Studies, Barents Chair in Politics, which basically means Arctic International Relations, at the Arctic University of Norway in Tromsø. And the Arctic University of Norway, that sounds like some kind of igloo university with polar bears roaming the campus. We have neither igloos, and the only polar bears are in Svalbard, where we also have facilities. But you see some key information about my institution. You can see it's one of the 4 Norwegian full-range universities. So please move to the next slide. Lorenzo and others, Lorenzo introduced very well, how to say, the spectrum between diplomats who touch on science and scientists, academics who touch on diplomacy. And as many young political science students, my great dream, my great ambition was to become a diplomat. And you probably do not, some of you may recognize Hugh Thant, the Secretary General of the UN in this picture, but you probably do not recognize the Scandinavian man speaking. The Scandinavian man speaking is Hans Tabor, who was a Danish ambassador to the United Nations in New York and happened to be chairman of the Security Council during the Six-Day War in 1967 between Israel and the Arab countries. And sitting in that chair was probably my ultimate ambition. But I very much wanted to combine academic international relations and diplomacy. So that's why I pursued a Cambridge PhD and a Harvard postdoc. And after my Harvard postdoc, I was told by the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs that I had become old and strange. And as I tell my students, that's only gone worse since. But today, as a professor of international relations, I do have the opportunity, I think, to engage in diplomacy. So, for example, as a professor of Arctic international relations, for example, I have attended what's called the Arctic Security Roundtable of the Munich Security Conference. So the Munich Security Conference, sponsored by the German government, is one of the most important international security conferences. And they have, of course, subdivisions, and one is the Arctic Security Roundtable, where I attend as an academic. I have also attended the high-level Arctic meetings of the Russian Federation Security Council. And of course, I attend such events as an academic, and I exchange with high-ranking military officers, high-ranking security officials, etc. So I think that's an example of that you can very much contribute to science diplomacy, both from the academic side and also from the diplomatic side. Time flies on interesting questions. Please move to the next slide. Something I emphasize in my own teaching is what I can call transdisciplinary skills, and that's the ability to work across sectors. So work between academia, business, civil society, and government. And I think that has been brought up very much in this afternoon's discussions. And as the red line indicates, that, how to say, a university, a research institution can be in one country, and a civil society partner, a business partner, can be in another country. And that are borders that one has to be able to cross. Please move to the last slide. And then something else which I think is very important to keep in mind, it is being able to think and dialogue across disciplines and across what I would call the four big systems surrounding humankind. And I would say that we as humans are surrounded by at least these four systems. That's one way of seeing it. There's a society around us, there's an environment, a nature around us, there's a culture, meaning, identity around us and within us, and there's technology. And these systems also correspond to basically academic disciplines. So society is, of course, the social sciences like economics, political science, sociology, law, etc., nature, various natural science disciplines, culture, questions of archaeology, history, languages, literature, etc., or technology, engineering, or I guess nanotechnology as we're talking about today. And earlier today, and just to conclude, earlier today we talked about, so what's the value of an academic or scientific background? And I would say the value, an important value, is being able to formulate a question and answer it. But something we all have to be very aware of is that, so I am pretty good at formulating and answering questions about politics or economics. Archaeologists or historians are good at identifying and answering these questions, etc., etc. And we probably have to be better at identifying questions outside our own discipline. And then the very final point about interests and values. So as I started saying, society is often very competitive, very conflictual, and that's competing interests. That's often what social sciences is about. Values, that can be tied very much to cultures. And that's, of course, basically the field of humanities. And if we just look at, for example, the question of masks and wearing masks now with the corona pandemic, there East and West have quite different views of individuality, of the individual and the collective. That in the West, we would wear a mask to protect ourselves, whereas in the East, you are probably wearing a mask to protect the collective from yourself. And these are cultural and value differences that are very important to understand. Thank you very much, and apologies for going a bit over time.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Rasmus. I'm going to put into the chat the various links. I hope that this will come into the chat. The links that we have created for breakout groups. Adrienne and Nino, I had originally proposed in our schedule together that you would come back and make some response remarks to Rasmus, but I think that let us move very quickly into the breakout rooms if that's agreeable to you. Everybody, we have, instead of breaking up this platform into rooms, we have opened up, or we will be opening up in half a second, 2 further platforms. The people who participating today would like to interact further with Adrienne and Lorenzo would stay in this room on this platform to talk about this activity of scientists who carry out government missions to address global challenges and other kinds of challenges. Persons who would like to pursue with Rasmus and Guillermo, who have experience and distance on these questions, very certainly of identifying and translating interests and values, but who also may be available to chat with you a little bit more about not only political tensions and contexts which have to be faced in science diplomatic roles, but also perhaps economic questions, innovation questions, and so forth. And I'll be with Antonino in a third room on the Harvard Zoom platform. That's the last link in my chat message. And we'll be talking about cultural crossings, because I think Antonino really can help us all reflect about, from a very personal point of view, what is our margin for action? What does it require of us to cross borders, and what can we hope to achieve and create in the world with this? So once again, you can choose a breakout group. I think that if all goes well, we'll divide up into 3 equal groups. I would like to ask you, if you find out that you've clicked on one of these links, or that you're staying in this group and that there are 15 or 20 people, please pick another group so that we can divide up into 3 small groups of 9 persons each. And I also want to mention that in the group with Nino, the so-called Harvard Zoom link, there is not a telephone audio connection in case any of you is on the telephone. I decided to disable that because I've had too many people get huge US phone bills. So you've understood. If you want to talk with Adrienne and Lorenzo, stay here. If you want to talk with Guillermo and Rasmus, choose the US02 web Zoom link. If you want to talk with Nino and myself, choose the Harvard Zoom link, which I'm going to open in a second. And let us come back here at about 10 past 5. How about that? That means in a little bit more than half an hour. And yes, Stella, thanks in advance for giving back the presenter rights to Adrienne and Lorenzo. Thanks very much. I'm going to open up the Harvard Zoom room now, and I hope all of this works well. One last thing, I do want to say that these breakouts are expected to be quite personal, not just interviewing the speakers. Please come forward with your own reflections, your own ambitions, your own hopes. Okay, I'm checking out. I'm going to open up my Harvard Zoom.
So, hello everyone. As Claire just left for the other room, which she'll be sharing together with Antonino. And as she announced, here we are together with Lorenzo and Adrienne. So if you would like to stay in this group, please stay, but let's try also to visit some of the rest of the groups. And then we can start a discussion. So Lorenzo and Adrienne, let's give us just a couple of more minutes so people can choose the correct room, and we will start with the discussion.
No problem.
Okay, so since now we are 16 people, I'm going to change the mode of the meeting to a meeting, which means that actually everyone now should be able to speak by unmuting their microphones.
Cool.
If you have any, if you have any issues, please let me know. But the way that you do that is basically by clicking on, by raising the hand. And then I'll give you the presenter rights. So the way to raise your hand would be just to have a look at the right corner of the chat box where you can raise your hand. And then I'm going to monitor that and give the rights to people to speak. So do we have a volunteer now who would like to ask their question?
In the meantime, to give them time, I think Adrian and I had the pleasure to exchange some emails prior to this workshop. And actually, in those emails, Adrian was kind enough to already tell me her doubts about where she would be fitting in the science diplomat taxonomy that I presented in that paper. And I would think that she operates as a policy officer within a governmental institution, that she doesn't have a proper mandate on science diplomacy, but from time to time, she is engaged in international affairs or bringing together different international actors to the table. In that regard, Adrian would be understood as a science diplomat, but in a non-institutionalized role. With that, I want to emphasize that we should not overstretch the concept of science diplomat. Being a diplomat, you need to be sanctioned by one government, by one state actor or something, that you are representing the interest of that country. That is contemplated with the Vienna Convention and so forth. But in the publication I was referring to, I also wanted to give the opportunity for researchers, for policy officers who are not recognized as such actors, but that they could play such roles in a non-institutionalized way. But anyhow, I think we have some questions.
Well, so far we have not seen any questions. I'm just trying to invite the audience to try to, to give us their, hand raising, but also they can try to unlock their microphone and they can speak with us. In the meantime, maybe perhaps Adrienne, do you want to tell us a little bit more about your journey, just to start with the conversation here?
Yes, thank you, Stella. I think it's for me it's a little bit still of a puzzle, and I think Lorenzo already underlined that. From a background working at a national institute and working for the topic of nano safety, quite in close connection to Dutch policy, it is a little bit on that line. When do you really represent Dutch policy ambitions through a more scientific level? I think that is not only for me, but for many of my colleagues at RIVM, every now and then the case. For example, my colleague Monique Groenewold, she's even much more on this policy side than I'm working, but I think it has grown over the years that there was about 6-7 years ago, a large nanotechnology program in the Netherlands that was called NanoNextNL. It was for, in the end, about 300 million euros, let's say an effort of, financed mostly by Dutch government, to make nanotechnology that boost for economy and also for national earnings increasement. but also, of course, to make nanotechnology one of the high-level topics to well, put it in my words, a little bit show off on a global scale, or at least on a European scale. But there was, for the first time, a kind of awareness. Perhaps safety and the discussions around that of nanotechnology, well, might form a hurdle or a stimulus, but anyway, we need to connect better to that. And by that time, I became much more involved, not only in the policy ambitions of certain ministries dealing with nanosafety, but also with the ambitions of the Economic Affairs Ministry, for example, or the Ministry of Education and Science. And then you notice how important it is that you have, let's say, not only science diplomacy abroad, if that is the only perspective, but also diplomacy even perhaps within one member state to bring these lines together. And what I noticed, for example, was in the Netherlands, and I think that's also on a European level quite often, is that safety policy and innovation policy are separate pillars or separate silos. That comes from it that it should be independent, because innovation has much more, let's say, this economic profit in mind, where safety should be driven by other values, of course. But yeah, I think in that respect, it fueled, for me at least, especially driven by the new policies there are, that yeah, there should be something of a bridge connected to it, and to connecting these two. And I think that is where I start from my background, from more science, but very much related to policies, and try to tune to policy ambitions at the European or a Dutch level, and how to make it, I think that was also mentioned in the former presentation, how to tune to goals perhaps of another, how to make that connection be realized. Because if we only speak in terms like we should connect that, the next question is how and who, and well, what kind of processes do we need to have in place? And when it's, let's say, on a small question, it's let's say fairly easy to achieve that. But well, the ambitions are very high, and I think that the questions are very well, abstract sometimes, and very large scale. Well, then it becomes really a puzzle. What could be my role as a person, well, trying to have some of these diplomacy activities, but also how can I help to achieve the goals of others? And I think for Nano, it's in the end that we want to have safe innovations that address these SDGs, or that address certain ambitions, well, within the EU, and make clear when there are, let's say, not the same ambitions anymore. I think in the end, you know, when you have the highest goal, well, we all want to have these safe, well, innovative products and technologies. Well, somewhere it's derailing, I think, and that is exactly where you can tune in and look for, okay, where do we have perhaps opposite ambitions, or where do we have opposite interests, or where don't we have any incentives anymore to fuel to those ambitions.
So Stella, I have a theory here. So perhaps all the people that are here with us are just people who weren't attending, because they didn't require any additional action, like going into a different room. They are quiet here, sitting and not asking either any question or telling us their doubts or their personal experiences.
Lorenzo,
I would be happy to prove me otherwise.
Yes, so I will try to prove you otherwise, by the way, because actually I saw, for example, Effie, who was typing something. That's why I made her a presenter. I'm not sure if she wanted to say something or just wanted to ask something. I guess also it's nearly the end of the day. People are a little bit tired, but here is again one last call of encouragement for people who are staying here in the room to raise their hand, to try to speak with us. I really hope that there are no technical issues. So let us just give them a little bit more time and see if someone else would like to speak right now. Effie, yes, thank you.
Thank you very much for this session. Actually, I was beginning to type something and then I decided not to do it because probably it was my personal, very personal question, and it wouldn't relate to other people. What I was thinking was that, of course, this was a very nice session, and we had the opportunity to see some cases from the side of scientists. To see some individual cases of what other people have done, and probably some of us can relate to these stories. What I would like to know is from the presenters, do you believe that this can happen in a more systematic way? Because okay, individuals can find themselves in these situations, but would you expect this to be happening in a more systematic way within, how can I say, within certain institutions that will bring together scientists closer to policy making, something like that.
I understand the question, Effie, and I think it's a really nice one. I'll step in, and Adrian, please complement on anything I mentioned. So, in order to perform systematic approaches, you need individuals. So, I think that for the last 10 years, science diplomacy has got a lot of traction within the policy arena and also in the scientific fields. And all of a sudden, there are a lot of people interested in science diplomacy or interested also in science advice or how to bring evidence and policy making together. When you have that culture, that breeding ground, then you will start seeing more and more systematic approaches being undertaken. In my presentation, I actually introduced at least 2 countries like the UK and Switzerland, which actually they have a really nice science diplomacy strategy with delegates all across the world and having really good goals for their interests that are undertaken on an annual strategy with different bullet points. I encourage you to go online and search for more information of the Science and Innovation Network and SwissNext. They are really doing a good job in order to drive competitiveness of the UK and the Swiss science and technology system. But you were right also. There must be more science diplomacy approaches being undertaken by research and academic sector. And I mean universities and research centers. And we have with us today Guillermo, who is the head of the Communication and Public Affairs Unit in a research center. More and more, we should have those kind of units in our research centers and universities. Most of the time, we see universities relying on professors or senior lecturers to perform duties in international affairs or in science communication, but they really require to have professionals in those units that can devote 24/7 or their actual job in doing those duties. We cannot rely on active researchers to perform as chancellors of international affairs without risking them losing their research activity, okay? And of course, for sure, they must have something to do, but I think there is a lot of, there is a big field there to grow for universities and research centers to have more professional staff in these units, and specifically some science diplomacy approaches. In this regard, I like to, for instance, mention SDG Bergen. This is from a specific department or unit at the University of Bergen in Norway, which simply they gather all the scientific evidence that is produced in this university, and their task is to engage with the United Nations in order to present these scientific results in the United Nations meetings. That's an example that should be followed by many other universities and research centers.
Yeah, if I may add to that, Lorenzo, there is an example which comes to mind. Last week, I was invited for what is called the first international workshop for nanotechnology for a sustainable future. And there was from, let's say, a technician's point, or a technical point of view, and from, I think, an entrepreneurial point of view, a really impressive lineup. People from Asia, Japan, Korea, South Korea, Australia, the US, Canada, and from Europe, well, especially also the Netherlands were involved as speakers. And let's say I felt it a little bit like coincidence, but it was because I'm a board member of the Dutch Nano-XNL Society, that I was also asked about my ideas on how can you connect nano safety in this story. What was, I think, very obvious in that workshop, that all of the participating member states had in mind that nanotechnology can offer a lot to achieve, or at least to contribute to achieving these SDGs. So there were also specialists on monitoring progress for SDGs, for example, were involved. What I did was at least making some, call it advertisement, or at least raising awareness for the European Nano Safety Cluster and the work they do. And just, you know, it's just the first step on, okay, there is a safety cluster, and please be aware what's going on there, because there's so much knowledge already, and there's also outreach needed to each other's communities. But this is just, you know, the first step. And I think that was also mentioned before. What I notice is you first have to build on the relationship with others and learn from each other's worlds. And so it was for me quite obvious that people were very much interested in what I had to say, and there were very nice reactions to my presentation. And they all were, let's say, in the same direction, like, oh yeah, but we see now the connection between the SDGs, our goals to come up with very nice innovations, and what is going on in nano safety. Because I mentioned, yeah, we work also on a safe and sustainable development of nanotechnology itself, and not only what can nanotechnology contribute to that. But, you know, this is just, well, one activity. And I think those kind of things would really make it worthwhile to extend to more these activities and more structural activities, as you mentioned, on a larger scale. And that requires where can you join efforts, and where can you make use of member states having the same goals in mind, or having the same ambitions to put this nanotechnology as a technology itself well, high in their priority lists. But if we don't do that, then I think, and I agree with Effie and you, that it becomes not more than every now and then give a presentation and hope for people to, well, somehow pick it up somewhere. But it's, let's say, a topic that is too large only for the nanosafety cluster, and it's too large for nanotechnology community worldwide, because that's such a diverse community. But if you make it perhaps a topic which is much more on the minds of science diplomats, then try to approach that in a structural way, then that could be very helpful. And it crossed also my mind, this example, because I was a bit surprised that it was, I was also, and we as NanoNextNL board were approached because the Dutch embassy in Canada was involved in the organization and had good connections to the university in Canada who was organizing this workshop. So that is, you know, all the bits and pieces coming together there.
Thank you very much, Adrienne. I see that we have some action in the chat box. So there is again a note from Effie. Thank you. It's important to have a list of exemplary cases from universities, research centers, or countries that have SP high in their priorities. Do you want to comment on that? SD, yeah. So FE means SD.
Yeah. I'm not sure, is Lorenzo talking, but he's still muted.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I was talking, elaborating on this question. So yeah, as I mentioned before, the SDG Bergen, I will write in the chat the exact link, is a good example of a science diplomacy unit in the University of Bergen, which is trying to bring the scientific evidence that is produced in the Bergen University to the table of the United Nations. And they are also running training workshops and so forth in United Nations summits, which is high impact. I think that if you wonder or if you have a look at different efforts undertaken by scientific research centers and universities because of COVID-19, you will find also some good examples. There are institutes, it comes to my mind, one in Barcelona, IS Global, which is producing very short policy briefs about specific aspects of the disease of COVID-19 to help policymakers and diplomats get familiar with the scientific implications of this disease, but also their political reach. Lastly, well, I would also comment on the role of national academies and scientific associations or professional associations, which also have a say in science diplomacy. The Royal Society of London does a really huge effort in international affairs, providing scientific expertise to foreign governments if required as well. And the National Academy of Sciences in the United States, or the AAAS, the American Association for the Advancement of Sciences, have also science diplomacy departments or units where they also engage in political discussions, bringing to the table ministries from the United States with international partners or international counterparts. So there are at least very many different examples. Unfortunately, I'm not the right one to mention anything related to nanoscience because I know very little about it. but for sure, maybe Adrienne, on her regulatory role, would know about certain institutions which undertake good efforts in this regard.
Yeah, I think it is important because to distinguish at least that there are, let's say, institutions who work solely on the nanosafety part, and that is, of course, also our sister institutes and people working in that context. But there is also a whole array of people working on the innovation part. And that is, I think, a much larger list of people and universities working there. For example, in the Netherlands, is what I know is the University of Twente. There's an institute called MESA Plus. Some of you perhaps know them. They're also supporting Dutch, how do you call it, economic missions to other countries, but also very much relating to Dutch policy on, well, what's the position of nanotechnology in economic efforts from the Netherlands to raise, for example, the Dutch earning capacity? What is, well, policy goals in that area to achieve, and what is the contribution of nanotechnology? If someone is interested in that, I can have a further look at that, or require from my other board members some of these names and institutions and the topics, because nanotechnology is, of course, a very broad domain of application, and it's really a different world whether you're interested in the more health-related aspects, or more in the energy or quantum computers, AI. Well, there's many topics that relate very much to this.
Adrienne has mentioned something very interesting in her previous intervention, and it's the fact that sometimes when you as a scientist or as a manager, when you engage with another country, you don't think about the contacts and networks that your embassies abroad already have at your disposal if you were to engage with them. That's a really interesting thing to do. I mean, if you are a nanoscientist and you want to organize a scientific conference in a different country where you are based, you may engage with your embassy abroad and ask for advice about locations, but also about networks and support beyond the academic field. Because obviously, as an academic, you already have a really nice network of researchers and other academics that are your equals and your peers. But if you want to reach further, that's essential to bring to the table other actors that can help you reach further. Oh, so there is another question. Daniela is asking in the chat, what was the biggest surprise in being involved in science diplomacy? Yeah, so I'm a PhD in molecular and cellular biology. Okay, and my dream when I was studying, when I was studying biology, and then when I did my PhD, was becoming a professor in cancer genomics and so forth. Unfortunately, that dream didn't come true because I had other experiences in my life that made me realize that I was very good as an academic researcher, but I was even better at bringing together the worlds of science and policy. And that's how, I got to start working at the Spanish Embassy in London back in 2015. I would say that the two best surprises about it is, first, in the embassy, I was the only one with an academic background, with let's say with a doctorate, with a PhD, and with a full experience of being a researcher after 13 years or 14 years of academic research experience. That actually makes you realize you are the science advocate in a institution, the embassy, that may be doing more things in favor of science, but may lack talent and expertise to do so. So I was working at the embassy to actually open a wide portfolio of scientific activities that the embassy wasn't undertaking before because they lacked that talent to do it. And that's one surprise that made me realize that science may be losing in certain arenas because there isn't any science advocate in that field, in that game. That's why I think we require people with a scientific background to work in parliament, to work in politics, to work in health, in justice, in many different places. We many times we focus only on having an academic professorship, and that's fine, that's good, but that's not getting out of the ivory tower. We require people getting out and building bridges so that professors may have bigger impact in other places. To showcase one impact of my experience at the embassy is that thanks for me being at the Spanish embassy in London, when the royal state visit took place in 2018 or 2017, sorry, the King and Queen of Spain came to London in an official state visit. Believe me, it's so complicated to get a slot in their busy agenda because you are competing there with trade, with finance, with culture, with the year of Shakespeare and Cervantes. And to be able to make 2 slots for a scientific activity in their busy agenda was a dream come true. So, and lastly, in regards for my experience with S4D4C since 2018, 2019, this is a very interesting project. And we are a consortium of 10 partners. There are people from the academic sector, people from the policy sector. And the biggest surprise was launching our S4D4C European Online Science Diplomacy course in May, and having more than 4,000 registered users in under 2 months. That was a full surprise for all of us because we understood there were going to be a certain number of users, but such thousands users, it was way unexpected. So it's a really nice surprise.
And finally, we see another question from Ilaria. Do you ever face a failure in your SD experience when your message was not accepted?
If, again, I should step in, Adrian, or you want to? Okay, so yeah, sure. When I was working at the embassy, and even now that I am working back in Madrid, in FECIT headquarters, let's say when you are an academic and you are doing your research, you have a lot of freedom in terms of, okay, I write up this project application and I get funding for it, and I will do whatever I want with that funding. In here, that's not the case. You are working for a public institution and you need to have a lot of green lights from the different chain of command. So you need to build up your negotiation skills, but also your persuasion skills to make your superiors believe in the projects and ideas you suggest and you propose. And you need to also liaise with frustration, because many times I had no's as an answer. And what I did was, okay, going back and do an exercise of why did I fail in convincing them? And sometimes you understand, well, there's no way I'm going to convince them because there are other interests at stake beyond science. And some other times it's because I didn't present it in the nice way. When you meet up with your ambassador or with your ministry, these people have very little amount of time for you. So you need to be very quick. An elevator pitch is required to get them on board. And if they don't believe in the project, at least that they believe in you. You need to build trust with them so that you get the enough freedom to develop those ideas.
Yeah, I can add to that, Lorenzo, that I fully agree with you. The building of trust is very important, but also what I once learned from one of our strategic advisors was to learn to cope with disappointments. Learn that sometimes, especially in your work, when you work in areas where innovation is part of your work, you are at a different pace than, for example, in policy, because policy is more reactive, where you look with these more technological innovations, for example, much further ahead. But I also have learned over the years that it's also challenging, but to learn about what are the ambitions and the goals the others have to deal with, and that can make to come to a common ground, and then you can add in, well, and now this is how my project or my idea might tune and might align with your ambitions, and that, well, is, let's say, increasing your goals, but it's not a guarantee that you will succeed.
Great.
I see we are back.
Yeah, I think that we're back. Maybe not everyone has rejoined this platform, but it sounds like Lorenzo and Adrian, you spent the last half hour getting interviewed, and we were able to have a kind of a more round table in our rooms. Thank you so much for undertaking that. Yeah, I just wanted to, I want this to be projected while we kind of finish up and say goodbye. Nino, do you want to say just like a couple of sentences about what your feeling is as you come out of our breakout?
Well, just a note to thank you, really, and it was really stimulating and gave me a sense of hope, and that we're working in the right direction together, and there is a common really feel that there is a lot we can do as a scientist. Yeah.
Yeah, we talked about an existing platform, for example. We were talking about some huge regional issues and very significant personal challenges when you try to come across borders of many different kinds and divides. And we were talking about platforms and networks that already exist that can help. And one of these is the Marie Skłodowska-Curie Alumni Association, or the entire program, which allows for worldwide peacemaking amongst people and scientists of different regions. Adrienne, do you want to say just a word about your feeling at the end of this day?
Well, I found very interesting, but also very learnful to hear about the questions also we had. Although we hadn't had this interactive chat perhaps as we thought, but also from the presentations before, it is food for thought for me at least, and I still think that also. It is something for the nano safety cluster, food for thought, or it should be, because I think it was mentioned in our session, shouldn't it be a more structural approach in science diplomacy to reach for certain ambitions and for certain goals? And I think the nano safety cluster was founded, well, more than 10 years ago, I think, and we have now come to a phase where we also have to demonstrate the worth and the value of it, because I think it is a very valuable cluster to have these people together who have bonded over the years and have already built on this trust and relationship. But we also need to outreach or to make it part of a more larger goals, and which are in the SDGs or in other policy deals. ambitions. And yeah, I think that would be very much worthwhile to explore further.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, it seems like this is a day that has really opened a lot of potential avenues. Rasmus, and if Guillermo is there, we were just wrapping up, just saying goodbye by sharing a couple of sentences about how we feel at the end of the day after your session. Rasmus.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Very interesting and stimulating as always. And in our group, we had people with diplomatic experience, national political experience, commercial experience, etc. And it was very interesting to hear these personal experiences with the political and economic context of scientific exchange.
Great. Great. So you managed to have a good interactive time. Thank you. I want to thank everybody who's stayed on today. I hope that your curiosity is piqued. I hope that you've seen some of these resources. Our Warsaw Science Diplomacy School, which is directed by Rasmus, does not have room for everybody. It's 24-person, 27-person, can't remember, 28-person week-long activity. But hey, if you think that it could be for you, please visit the Inside website and see if you want to apply. The applications will open up, I think, in February or so of next year. You've seen that Lorenza's project S4D4C has this fantastic MOOC. You can spend about 15 hours really educating yourself about present day and science diplomacy mechanisms on European and world level. And you'll see there a couple of historical case studies from inside, because we're focused on history of science diplomacy. So if Guillermo is here, I can tell him that we found a lot of science diplomats who are much older than 1898. And then finally, I just want to mention that if you're on LinkedIn, please come to the EU Science Diplomacy LinkedIn group. I don't have the exact formulation here, but you should be able to find it. EU Science Diplomacy Group, open group to be joined, and you can start networking there. So thanks very much. I do take note that I've also gotten some emails during this session with ideas like Adrienne expressed, that maybe the nanosafety cluster can start looking carefully at these bridge building reflections to move even farther in the direction that you have opened up together. So thanks so much for being part of this session. Stella, do you want to finish the NSC training day?
Yes. So yeah, we actually came to the point in which we need to close this very nice, interesting and intensive day. So just to summarize, today we had 2 parallel rooms which were called under the umbrella of the Nanosafety Cluster Training Day. We were in room 2, which was called Nanosafety Stakeholder Engagement. There was another room on hands-on training on tools and models related to nanosafety. We are very happy that you were here with us today, where we had a closer look at the ACEnano tools. Then we had a very nice introduction on nanotechnology regulations and risk governance by our colleagues from Working Group G. And we finished with these very, very inspiring talks from the experts that Claire Mays invited us to talk about science diplomacy. I see here that there are a couple of more resources posted in the chat. And just to wrap up the day, so far in this parallel room today we had nearly 50 participants in most of the sessions. We are very happy that you expressed so much interest in this session. We would also plan to make the recordings available and also the presentation slides. So please bear with us and we will communicate with you in the next couple of weeks. We plan to also share this, this information via the nanosafety cluster, but also you receive notifications via email. Finally, I wish to thank again to all the presenters. Some of them are not here anymore, but still thank you very much for these inspiring talks. Thank you also to our colleagues from CEA who were the hosts of the NanoSafe Congress and were so kind to provide us with this platform so we can run the nanosafety cluster events. And finally, in order to stay tuned about what we plan to do in terms of training and education, you have seen a couple of times a link with which you can sign up for the nanosafety cluster training group, a group on training, communication, and education. So sign up there and you'll receive more information for us about our upcoming trainings and other events. And finally, before I close this session, I wish to make a short announcement about the next event that might be of interest to you. And this is the NanoTalks Conference 2020, which is the final event of 3 projects, Gracious, Patros, and Biorima. So currently we have our Alstrup submissions open until the 30th of November. So we will be very happy to see you there. And this will be another amazing event related to discussions about nanosafety, nanotechnologies, and more recent trends about sustainability and safe by design. So with this, I would like to close this interesting day. And yes, let's see ourselves again in the next events.
Thanks.
Thank you, Claire. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.